Hey, everybody. Glad you're here. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and we're having yet another great late night chat. So let's jump in.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another one of our great late night conversations. The way this works is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions. It is your questions that make the second half of the show what it is. And you can send those questions via Rumble Rants. If you're watching on Rumble, you can cash at me at Maupin 22. But the absolute best way to send me your questions, go to buymeacoffee.com. Send me your questions. You can be anonymous. You can even do it when I'm not live, like somebody did, right? A couple hours ago, someone named Raphael sent in a question. That'll be the first one I answer. Please send questions. With your questions, you are supporting the work that I do. And you're also making the second half of the show more entertaining. That's really the best part of the show, is when I'm just kind of freewheeling, answering people's questions. So send in questions, get me talking. I'll do my opening remarks for the first hour or so, talking about what I need to talk about. Then it's all you guys asking your questions. Buy me a coffee is the way to do it. As far as announcements, the Center for Political Innovation is moving ahead. We're on the move. We have a statement now that we would like people to help us circulate up on our website. About dissident MAGA needs to awaken. So if you want to help us circulate that statement, we're urging people in the dissident wings of the MAGA movement, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others, to call an anti-war march on Washington. So if you want to help us circulate it, that'd be great. You can also just join the Center for Political Innovation, go to our website and help us by becoming a member, get involved in our activities. Great community that we've got. And as I said before, the way we do this is I give my opening remarks, then we do the roll call, and then I answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, send a question. The best way to send questions is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to send in your questions. And you can also do Rumble Rants, and you can cash at me at Maupin 22, but buy me a coffee is the best way. Please send questions for the second half of the show. Need people to do it. I really do. So send some questions, support this channel, support the work that I do, etc. Now, tonight, I decided to do this chat, this opening remarks, this presentation I'm about to give, because, as you all know, I recently recorded 3 episodes with the YouTube channel Academic Agent. And I've been on that channel before. This was my second time. We did 3 episodes last week. And the first one just came out. And in that one, we talked about Noam Chomsky. And in that episode, it came up that, that on the neocon wing of the right, the neoconservative faction of the right wing, the pro-Israel, pro-regime change wars wing of Trumpism, that in those circles, there is a new obsession with Qatar, or Qatar, right? We say Qatar in America. I think in the Arabic-speaking world, they say Qatar. But the Middle Eastern country of Qatar is the basis of a new kind of obsession of the right wing. And again, the world is much more nuanced than people think it is, right? So the argument of a lot of the neocons on the right is they're angry at Tucker Carlson because he's criticizing Israel. And so they're calling him Tucker Qatarlson, right? And they're claiming that that anyone who speaks in support of the Palestinians is secretly working as an agent of the Qatari monarchy. That's their claim. Furthermore, there is some rising resentment toward Qatar over the fact that Qatar is friendly to the BRICS and has hosted negotiations, between the Palestinians and Israel. And, there is some layer of, full-on resentment against Qatar by U.S. imperialism. There's an obsessive opposition to it from the neocon pro-Israel right. And it's a complicated issue, and nobody explains it. A lot of people don't know what they're talking about, right? Especially on the right, on the Islamophobic pro-Israel wing of the right, where Muslims, they hate Muslims. They think Muslims are all terrorists. In New York City, this is very prevalent. I remember, when I came to New York City, I would see conservatives with signs that outlaw Islam. And I would say to them, do the words freedom of religion mean nothing to you? And they'd say, well, Islam's not a real religion, Caleb. It's just a terrorist cult. It's just a terrorist group, and that there's a section of the neocon pro-Israel right wing that is obsessed with hating Muslims, and they know absolutely nothing about the Islamic world. For example, when the Iran nuclear deal was being passed in 2015, there would be rallies to support the deal. There'd be rallies opposing it. And the people opposing it would say that Iran was involved in 9/11. Well, Iran are Shia Muslims, and Osama bin Laden is a Wahhabi from Saudi Arabia. And I also, when, I saw conservatives going after Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton had this aide, Huma Abedin, right? And they said that because she lived in Saudi Arabia, she was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood's illegal in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they're Wahhabis. And there's no knowledge about any of this. So I'm just gonna, in this stream tonight, we're going to talk about the role that Qatar plays, why there's hatred for them right now among the pro-Israel conservatives, what's going on, their relationship in terms of American politics, in terms of international politics. We're just going to talk about the role of Qatar, and we're going to get this right. So, since the 1960s, in the Middle East, there's been a rise of what they call Islamist politics or political Islam. Right? Islam is the religion of people in the Middle East, also people in Indonesia, also people in North Africa, also people in Central Asia. It's a major world religion. And in the 1950s, the Cold War had begun. You had the rise of various anti-imperialist movements in the Muslim world. The most prevalent of which at the time was in Egypt. You had a president named Abdel Nasser. Gamal Abdel Nasser was a general in Egypt who took power and declared himself to be an Arab socialist. He was not a communist, right? He said communism was atheistic. He said, I have a new form of socialism called Arab socialism that embraces Islam, but is for a secular state. And I'm going to fight Israel. I oppose Israel. And Abdel Nasser did a huge amount to improve the lives of the people of Egypt. And to this day, the largest power plant in the Middle East is the Aswan Dam that was built by the government of Abdel Nasser. The Soviet Union teamed up with Egypt, and they built a huge power plant. And to this day, Egypt is still fully electrified. And that is thanks to the Aswan Dam, this hydroelectrical power plant that was built by the socialist president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser. And so, there was a rise in Arab nationalist socialist movements, right? You had in various Middle Eastern countries what they called the patriotic officers, people in the military who'd gotten military training and were anti-imperialist. And eventually in Libya, Gaddafi was a patriotic officer who established socialism in Libya, in Syria, and in Iraq. You had Baathism, which was like a breakaway form of Arab socialism that took power. And that, that throughout the Middle East, you had Arab nationalist movements that were in favor of a secular government, were not communist. They were not atheistic Marxist-Leninists. They had a unique interpretation of socialism. It was for the Arab world. They embraced Islam, but believed in a secular government, and they were Arab focused, right? There's not only Arabs in the Middle East, right? In Iran, they are not Arabs. They are Persians. The Middle East has Kurds. It has Turkmen, right? People of Turkish descent. There are different ethnic groups. There are Jews in the Middle East, and every Middle Eastern country has a Jewish population. Now, those Jewish populations started moving to Israel after the state of Israel largely, but even in Iran today, there are still a number of Jews in Iran. So, the Middle East is not just Arabs. A lot of people think all Muslims in the Middle East are Arabs. That is not true. Arabs are one particular ethnic group. And Arab nationalism was a movement built on the idea that eventually all the countries that were Arab majority countries would merge into one. The borders of the Middle East were drawn in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And this was a secret treaty that was created during the First World War. The countries that were winning the war, France and Britain and America and Russia, they drew up the borders of what is now the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, they were on the losing side. And the idea was after World War I, they would draw new borders for the Middle East. And that's where all these borders come from. Saudi Arabia, right? That's the chunk of the Arabian Peninsula that was given to the Saud ruling family, right? The House of Saud, right? And you have Yemen, you have Oman. What does Yemen mean? It means on the left. And what does Oman mean? It's on the right, right? And if you look at a map, Yemen's on the left and Oman's on the right. I mean, it's just, these are not real borders. Iraq was drawn up, the borders of the Middle East as we know them are artificially created by imperialism. With the French got Syria, the British installed their kind of puppet monarchs in different places. These are artificial borders. Arab nationalism was based on the idea that the Arab people had been artificially divided by the imperialists. They have puppet governments, puppet kings, and monarchs selected by the imperialists to rule over them. And these patriotic officers were going to rise up. They were going to create secular governments that were not religious governments that allowed religious freedom, but they were going to fight for the Arab people, not the Turkmen, not the Kurds, not the Jews, the Arab people, right? And that was, Arab socialism and Arab nationalism was a big movement in the 1950s. The United States was not a big fan. And so starting in the 1950s and 60s, the CIA started promoting Islamism, or what they call political Islam, as an alternative to Arab nationalism. And political Islam was the argument that we don't need a secular state to champion the Arab people. We need a religious government to champion all the people of our region, right? That was the alternative. Islamism as a political movement has grown throughout the Middle East. This was part of the late Cold War, right? Zbigniew Brzezinski learned that the way to effectively weaken the Soviet Union and weaken anti-imperialism was to make it confusing, promote different sides. It's like I often use the analogy that William S. Lind uses in his book on counterinsurgency and fourth generation warfare. He says, David and Goliath, that story has been told for 4,000 years. And who during that 4,000 years has ever sympathized with Goliath? People always side with David. So if you want to defeat insurgents, what you need to do is you need to make sure it's never a David versus Goliath scenario. You create 7 different Davids who are all fighting each other, and you have Goliath step back and say, look, why are this everybody always fighting? And then that's how you confuse them. And that was the late Cold War strategy. So in the Middle East, to push back against Arab nationalism, which was aligned with the Soviet Union and Arab socialism and such, the United States government started fomenting and funding Islamism as a political current. Now, there are 3 different forms and interpretations of Islamism. And again, this is very important because a lot of people on the anti-Islamic side, a lot of the people that are screaming about Qatar and all of this, they don't understand any of this. They think all Muslims are the same. They don't get it. Well, there are big differences here. There are 3 major schools of political Islam or Islamist thought. And the first school of Islamist thought is the ideology of Saudi Arabia, which until the 1970s and 80s was really just a Saudi Arabian thing. Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family, going back to the 1600s, they had a relationship with an Islamic scholar named Wahhab. And many people to this day believe Wahhab was an agent of the British Empire. But Wahhab was this Islamic scholar, and he was what you would call an Islamic fundamentalist. He said that we need to live exactly as things were done in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. That in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, we had a monarchy, and that's the kind of government that we need. In the time of the Prophet Muhammad, women couldn't drive cars, women couldn't vote, women had no rights. That's what we need. And that the Wahhabi current of Islam seeks to restore the 1400s, essentially, keep Islamic civilization true to the way it was during the Prophet Muhammad. And some people even argue that they're a bit Amish. Some of these Wahhabis don't even believe in technology. Wahhabis are famous for eating with 3 fingers when they eat. Why? Because supposedly the Prophet Muhammad ate with 3 fingers, right? And that they want to do things exactly as they were done in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and they want to restore the caliphate, right? The government that the Prophet Muhammad created was called the caliphate, and they want to restore the caliphate. They believe that that is the only kind of government that is in line with what God wants. They believe you literally must interpret the Quran and you must create the caliphate. That's the Saudi ideology. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a Wahhabi government. It's an attempt to build a government modeled on exactly what the Prophet Muhammad would have wanted. And that's the Wahhabi ideology. And Osama bin Laden was a Wahhabi, and ISIS are Wahhabis. And there are different interpretations of Wahhabism, but Saudi Arabia is the fountainhead of Wahhabism. And starting in the 70s and 80s, the Saudis started exporting Wahhabism around the world, largely by bringing Muslims to Saudi Arabia and teaching them Wahhabism by funding mosques. There are many mosques in America that are funded by Saudi Arabia. And because they are funded by Saudi Arabia, they push a more Wahhabi interpretation of the Quran. Wahhabism is the Saudi interpretation of Islam. Now, ISIS, they're trying to restore the caliphate. They claim to be the caliphate, Islamic State. Osama bin Laden was a Wahhabi. He was a wealthy Saudi. His family, the bin Laden family, have a construction company that has a state monopoly on construction in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the bulk of the population are guest worker slaves. They have no rights. In Saudi Arabia, if you're a Shia Muslim, which is another form of Islam, you are basically a non-human. You have no rights. You're only allowed to work in manual labor. The Shia are, treated horrendously in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a very autocratic country. One of the only countries in the world where they still cut people's heads off. They have beheadings, public beheadings, and that basically in Saudi Arabia, if you are accused of sedition, if you're accused of working against the king, you get tortured, you have no rights whatsoever. And Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of oil. And that oil money, gets handed out kind of nepotistically. The more money you have is the closer you are to the royal family. The royal family owns the entire country. It's their private property. And the closer you are to the royal family, the bigger of an oil stipend you get. One story I've heard about Saudi Arabia is, and this is kind of fascinating, in Saudi Arabia, your social status is largely based on your license plate, the license plate number on your car. The lower the number, the more of an important person you are. The Saudi king's car has number 1. And if you have a license plate that's number 100 or number 120, that means you're really close to the royal family. And that people in Saudi Arabia will spend millions of dollars just to get a license plate number that is lower on their car, right? And that the inner circle of the Saudi royal family, the people that are very close to the king, are billionaires many times over. They're very, very wealthy. And it's oil money. Right? It's oil money, and that Saudi Arabia acts as like a vassal, a middleman for ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And that they arrange for American and British corporations to extract their oil, and they have lots of money. And that's Saudi Arabia. And they have a country that is, a political system that is modeled on, the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. A couple years ago, they did decide to let women drive cars. It used to be, for the longest time, it was illegal for women to drive cars in Saudi Arabia. Now, my understanding is it did happen, but the women, if they got pulled over, they would bribe the cop, and he just looked the other way. A huge amount of corruption. But technically, if a woman was driving a car, she could receive a public flogging, or something like that. There was, it was a pretty autocratic legal system. And again, there have been many cases of guest workers, people in Saudi Arabia from the Philippines, people in Saudi Arabia from Sri Lanka or from India, poor people who went there, and they get accused of something and they get their head cut off, and they have basically no rights, and they get their heads cut off. And Saudi Arabia is a pretty autocratic country that's propped up by the United States. But in recent years, it started to become more independent, primarily because the United States is not dependent on them as they once were. The reason that Saudi Arabia was able to get wealthy is because the USA needed their oil. We don't need their oil anymore. Because of hydraulic fracking, we have our own oil. And that, the world is not reliant on Saudi Arabia the way it once was. So Saudi Arabia has gotten a little more independent. And, during the Ukraine war, Biden wanted Saudi Arabia to completely cut off Russia. And they said, no. They said, we're not going to do that because we have to negotiate oil outputs. And Saudi Arabia is a major oil exporter, and so is Russia. And so the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the Russian president have to be able to negotiate oil price outputs so that people know what the oil markets are going to do. So no, they couldn't do that. That's Saudi Arabia. And Wahhabi ideology is the ideology of Saudi Arabia. And in the 70s and 80s, it spread. One of the main ways Wahhabi ideology spread was that Osama bin Laden, basically he was this wealthy young man, part of the billionaire family that has a state monopoly on construction. He decided to rally the Muslims of the world to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And he built a Wahhabi army that, went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. And this was arranged by the CIA. They arranged for Osama bin Laden, who was this fanatical religious guy who was in the one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia. They arranged for him to go around the world building a Wahhabi movement, setting up Wahhabi schools, training people in Wahhabism, and then taking them to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. And in the southern USSR, Wahhabi terrorist groups set up shop in Chechnya and elsewhere and started fighting the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union were atheists. They were considered to be infidels, right? The idea was we're going to drive out the communists and we're going to create, Wahhabism. We're going to create the caliphate, right? So that's Wahhabism. Now, the second school of political Islam is Westernized. You can call it Westernized Islam, or it's Sunni Islam descended from the teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood still exists, but there are many, many people that adhere to its ideas that are no longer affiliated with it. But the Muslim Brotherhood was a religious movement started in Egypt in the 1920s. There was a guy named Al-Banna, and Al-Banna was an Egyptian, very conservative Islamic man who visited America. He came to the United States and he loved it. He loved America. Because at that point, we were much more conservative than we are now. And he came to America and he loved the lawns of America. Americans mow their lawns, right? We mow our lawns. And he saw Americans mowing their lawns and how their lawns were perfectly cut. And he said, that's so disciplined. That's so Islamic, right? In other countries, they might let the grass grow wild. But in America, we mow our lawns perfectly. And in America, during these days, it was illegal to have naked women anywhere. It was, we were a much more kind of Victorian, puritanical country. He loved it. And so Al-Banna came back to the Middle East and started preaching that America was more Muslim than the Arab countries. He said, in America, you have Islam everywhere, but no Muslims. And in the Muslim world, we have Muslims everywhere, but we have no Islam. And he basically argued that the British Empire, the Victorian Western way of doing things that existed in like America in the 1920s, right? That all these things were more in line with the Quran and with the Islamic way of being than the Arab people, and that the Arab countries needed to get religion again. They needed to start studying the Quran. They need to be religious and adopt the Western way of doing things. And part of that was that they believed in, they absolutely believed in capitalism. Capitalism is good. The free market is good. It creates a huge amount of wealth and people work really hard, and that's very religious. And as long as people are religious, there's nothing wrong with capitalism, right? The communist movement was rising and Arab nationalism and such. And they said, no. The problem isn't imperialism. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem is people are just not true to the Quran. And so if we follow the Quran and we practice good Islam, and people are moral, we won't have any of these problems. And America is a very prosperous country, a very wealthy country, because they follow Islamic ways of doing things. They have laws against pornography. They all mow their lawns. That was kind of the Muslim Brotherhood interpretation. And it was just a wing of Islam in Egypt until the 1950s, until Abdel Nasser, the Arab nationalist leader, came to power in Egypt. When Abdel Nasser was in power, the CIA and the West didn't like him. So they began funding the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, because it had already been in Egypt, already had a mass base, and it built itself up as the main group that was trying to overthrow the Arab socialist government of Nasser. And their argument against it was that it was a secular government. And they said, we need a religious government. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, like all Muslims, was opposed to Israel, right? They said that Israel is violating the rights of Palestinians, right? The Jews have seized Palestine and violated our rights, etc. But at the same time, they really hated communism, because communism is atheistic, because communism doesn't believe in the free market. They argued that America was the most Islamic country and the Middle East needed to be like America. And so Arab socialism, and especially communism, was the enemy. And the Muslim Brotherhood built itself up over the course of the 60s, 70s, and 80s as an anti-communist movement in the Middle East. And it spread all over the Middle East, right? It was originally just in Egypt, but it spread all over the Middle East to fight against communism and Arab nationalism. And it spread with the help of Qatar, the Qatari monarchy that started funding them in the 1960s, and the CIA in the United States. And actually today, Turkey's government is very much a westernized, Muslim Brotherhood kind of government, right? The government of Tunisia is also Muslim Brotherhood, in its basis. But even, the current leader of Turkey, right? Turkey technically has a secular government, but, the Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, is an Islamist, and he's a Muslim Brotherhood Islamist. And so the Muslim Brotherhood are what they call westernized Islam. That's the second current of political Islam. Now, the third current of political Islam is called Shia Islam, right? Now, Shia Islam has been around since the time of the Prophet Muhammad. I mean, it's an interpretation of Islam, kind of like, among Christians, you have Protestants and Catholics, but there are many different types of Protestants, right? There are many different types of Sunni, and there are many different types of Shia. Shia Islam believes that after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, imams, people were appointed to fulfill his role. And the first person to fulfill his role was Imam Ali. And then they have Imam Hussein, and they have, there are different interpretations, but the most common is they believe in 12 imams that came after the Prophet Muhammad, and that the Prophet Muhammad had successors. Sunnis don't accept that he had any successors. Shia do. They say that, Muhammad's role was filled by Ali, by Hussein, etc. And this goes back to after the time of the death of the Prophet Muhammad. The imams were battling against many of the leaders who existed at that time. And many of the imams were killed, martyred in very horrendous ways. And that this was kind of a fight between emerging capitalism and feudalism, right? Capitalism was emerging with the mercantile classes in the Muslim world. And, the caliphate, had a monarchy kind of system. It had a hereditary leader, and that the way that the imams rallied people to support them against the mercantile classes was by being populists. And if you look at the statements of the imams, Imam Ali, Imam Hussein, their teachings are very populistic, right? Imam Ali, I think he said, "I have never seen great wealth without great piles of rights violations all around it, without the violations of people's rights surrounding it," right? And that Shia Islam emphasizes standing with the oppressed, that it is important to stand with the oppressed. And martyrdom is really emphasized in Shia Islam. Some Shia Muslims actually will pray every day, "God, I want to be a martyr. Let me die for the faith. Let me die for the oppressed," because the belief is that the martyr gets the highest place in heaven. That's Shia Islam, right? Recognizing all of that. So during the 1970s, Shia Islam really, there are many different interpretations, but Shia Islam largely started to identify with anti-imperialist movements. It began to criticize and denounce capitalism. It began to denounce the Western imperialist system. And eventually in 1979, Khomeini, right? Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who had been an Iranian Shia Muslim leader, came back to Iran and established the Islamic Republic of Iran. And his slogans were death to America. He called America the Great Satan. And he said, not capitalism, but Islam, war of poverty against wealth, neither East nor West. And he was very anti-communist, but he fit Shia Islam in with anti-colonialism. And the Islamic Republic of Iran gave weapons and funding to the IRA. It supported Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and it considered itself to be part of the global national liberation movement, but different because they were not Marxists and they rejected Marxism. They said, we have a uniquely Islamic national liberation movement. And throughout the Middle East, many people were inspired by the Shia revolution, right? And Hezbollah in Lebanon is a Shia organization. The Houthis in Yemen are a Shia organization. And there are many Shia in Iraq. There are many Shia in Pakistan. And Shia Islam, especially since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, has largely viewed itself as kind of an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, anti-Western movement. But they are against Arab nationalism because Arab nationalism is only for the Arab people. Islamists of all stripes generally say, we're for everybody as long as you're a Muslim. As long as you convert to Islam, we're for you. So in Iran, for example, right, Iran is not an Arab country. It's a Persian country. There are Arabs in Iran. There are Kurds in Iran. There are Turkmen in Iran. But in Iran, it was originally the Kingdom of Persia, right, the Persian monarchy of the Shah. But when after that they became the Islamic Republic of Iran, that was for everybody. Racism was outlawed in the Islamic Republic's constitution, right? Racism was forbidden because political Islam is for everybody, right? And that's the idea. And that in the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, you have a lot of Arabs, you have a lot of Kurds, you do have Persians as well. Persians are the majority in Iran, and it's multi-ethnic, right? Whereas Arab nationalism wants eventually one government for the Arab people is fighting for the Arabs. That's the three currents of political Islam. Qatar, the government of Qatar, whatever you want to say it, they have been, since the 1960s, the primary funders of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is what I said, the westernized Muslims, and they have been good friends of America, right? They have been very helpful in trying to, in the 1980s, there was an uprising against the Syrian government. And the Muslim Brotherhood seized 2 cities, and the Syrian government bombed and destroyed and eventually retook them, but it was a bloodbath. Saddam Hussein in Iraq had a lot of battles with the Muslim Brotherhood and those kind of aligned groups. And that in many parts of the Middle East, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, they worked to overthrow, to fight against Abdel Nasser. They were, a dangerous force in Egypt that was working against the Egyptian military. And they have a lot of support in the countryside, the rural areas of Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood, right? They're that third current of, they're that second current of political Islam, funded by the Qatari monarchy and used as foot soldiers against communism and Arab nationalism in the Middle East. Now, Hamas started out as the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, go back to the 1970s. Who was leading the Palestinian resistance? It was Yasser Arafat, who was a Soviet-aligned guy. He wasn't a communist, but he was like a close friend. But who were the major organizations? The Palestine Liberation Organization. You had the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Marxist-Leninist group. You had the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, another Marxist-Leninist group led by Layla Khalid. And that communists dominated the Palestinian resistance, really from 1967 onward. Palestinian resistance, from 1967 until like the end of the Cold War, the Palestinian resistance was dominated by secular Arab nationalists and communists, right? You had the Arab Liberation Army that was formed by followers of Saddam Hussein, the Arab Liberation Organization that was Ba'athist, right? And that Islamists didn't have the majority. So it is now well understood, right? And this is just factual, right? And this is confirmed by Israeli generals. This is confirmed by mainstream media. You can choose not to believe this if you want. It's now confirmed that to counter the Marxist wing of the Palestinian resistance, Israel helped the Muslim Brotherhood set up shop in Gaza. That is documented now. Israel admits this, that basically the communists were dominating the Palestinian resistance. So covertly, the Mossad arranged to help the Muslim Brotherhood set up shop. And the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood that was very against communism flourished with the help of Israel. because they wanted to confuse and divide the Palestinian resistance. But then what happened? The Soviet Union fell, and the communist wing of the Palestinian resistance got weaker. And so the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine flourished. And now what we call Hamas was originally the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. And their belief is that capitalism is fine, but it must stay true to the Quran. We need to be Islamic. And they're not friendly to Saudi Arabia because they don't believe in the Wahhabi interpretation. But they're also, somewhat hostile to Iran. They consider the Iranians to be Shia apostates. They don't accept the Shia interpretation. And that's Hamas, right? And Hamas is from the wing of the Palestinian, of the political Islamic movement that is close to the Qatari monarchy. And so the basis of Zionists kind of obsessing over Qatar is that Qatar, it's their wing, it's their political movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, that, eventually created Hamas and led to Hamas setting up shop with Israel's covert assistance. And that the Palestinian resistance and Hamas is led by a wing of Islam that is funded by Qatar and now from Turkey as well. Now, this is important to understand for a number of reasons. What does all this have to do with Kamala Harris? What does all this have to do with the synthetic left? What does all this have to do with anything, right? Well, what happened under the Bush presidency, and how did that change under the Obama presidency? So what happened? 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, the U.S. government launched the War on Terror. The War on Terror. And the War on Terror was the United States invading Afghanistan, the United States invading Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, the United States conducting drone strikes all over the Middle East. And at one point during the War on Terror, during the early years of the War on Terror, George W. Bush called the War on Terror a crusade. Now, in the English language, crusade, it just means a big fight, right? It just means a big fight. But in the Middle East, crusade brings up memories of when the Catholic Church was rallying all kinds of Europeans to go to Palestine and kill a bunch of Muslims. It's, and it was, the European Christians seizing Jerusalem from the Muslims and slaughtering Muslims en masse. It was, the Crusades were a pretty ugly thing. George W. Bush called the War on Terror a crusade. Not a good choice of words. And it probably wouldn't have stung so much and offended the Muslim world so much if at the same time George W. Bush was not aligned with all these evangelical Christians like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and others who really did believe that the War on Terror was a fight between God and Islam, right? And that you had a General George Boykin, who said, I am in this war because our God is stronger than their God. Right. And that there was a feeling among the evangelical wing of the Bush camp that included a lot of people in the military. West Point got to be very religious during these years, that this was a war between Christianity, the true religion, and Islam, the fake religion. Right. And I remember that. People believed that. I had teachers who believed that. I remember during those years I was in high school and I had a teacher who told us that 9/11 had happened because these Muslims have never read the Bible. It says, "Thou shalt not kill." And I remember raising my hand and I said, "I think the Quran says you can't do murder also." And then, how do you know that? And I said, well, my family hosted a student from Pakistan, and it was, "Oh my God, Caleb knows a Muslim. He must be a terrorist. He knows a Muslim." And there was just this feeling among evangelical Christians who were aligned with Bush that Islam was a terrorist conspiracy, that this was a war of Christians against Muslims. So when Bush slipped and called it a crusade, even though the Bush family is very close to the Saudi royal family, a lot of Muslims were very, very, very alienated by those words. And when Bush was president, it was clear there was a big gap between the Muslim world and America, that America's relationship with the Muslim world had pivoted. And part of that was that Bush invaded Iraq with lies about weapons of mass destruction, and that there was just a big gap between America and Europe. That's really also what it got down to, right? Is that Europe didn't support the invasion of Iraq. They supported the invasion of Afghanistan. They didn't support the invasion of Iraq. And that many of the Arab countries were opposed to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, almost all of them. The Arab and Muslim world was very alienated. So what then happened, right? The financial crisis happened. And then Barack Hussein Obama, emphasis on Barack Hussein Obama, rode in on a white horse. He was the savior, right? The first black president of America. And what did they say about Obama in the early years of his presidency? They pointed out that he studied at a Muslim school in Indonesia. That's true. He went to school in Indonesia after Indonesia became an Islamist country, after the communist government was overthrown in 1965. Obama's mother married Lolo Sotoro, a top general of the Indonesian military who was a Muslim. At the time that the Indonesian government was going around and slaughtering all the ethnically Chinese people and becoming an Islamist government, little Barack Obama, 10-year-old Barack Obama, was there with his stepfather and with his mother, and he went to a Muslim school. And apparently he got in trouble, right? He got in trouble for giggling when they were studying the Quran, and his teachers were very offended. You should never giggle when you're studying the Quran. You're disrespecting the scriptures. And I guess Obama was a little bit of a troublemaker. He got, disciplined pretty harshly in his Islamic schools. But Obama went to a radical Muslim school. And Obama's middle name is Hussein, because his father was also a Muslim. His father, who he didn't know, was from Kenya in Africa, and his father gave him a middle name, Hussein. And Barack Obama, when he got into office, he worked very hard to reset America's relationship with the Arab world. You'll remember this. He went to Egypt and gave a speech about Islam, and he apologized for overthrowing the Iranian government and the CIA overthrowing the elected leader Mossadegh in Iran. And he did everything he could to reset relations. Folks, Obama, his leadership of the United States in regards to the Middle East is a 21st century version of what Napoleon did. When Napoleon tried to take over Egypt and Syria, he put up posters everywhere saying that he was a Muslim. This is a true story, right? He was a French military leader, and when he was trying to colonize Egypt and Syria for France, he put up posters everywhere saying, "I am a follower of the Prophet. I have come to restore your rights." He met with top Muslim clerics and told them this. And to this day, there are some Muslims who maintain that, yes, Napoleon was a Muslim. No, he wasn't. And many people in Napoleon's inner circle knew this. He faked out the Muslim world, but pretending to be their friend. The British were their colonizer. There was a lot of anger at the British, but there's a lot of feeling that, hey, France is just another European country. But Napoleon, who apparently had been a Freemason, and Freemasons do study the Quran as part of their Masonic education, he was familiar with the Quran, and he had his troops put up posters all over Syria and all over Egypt saying, "I come to restore your rights. I am a follower of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him." And I believe that that's what Obama was basically doing. He never said he was a Muslim, but it was hinted at endlessly in the media, right? First of all, they said, Obama would not ever use the phrase radical Islamic terrorism, right? And the right wing made a really big deal. Why won't he call it radical Islamic terrorism, right? Well, he made a point of not ever using that phrase. They also point out that when Obama gave his speech against ISIS, he repeatedly said they are not Muslims, right? So it was like he wasn't against Islam or whatever. And that, Obama, there were all these rumors that Obama was a Muslim. He wasn't. He was married at, his pastor was Jeremiah Wright. He was from a very liberal church in Chicago. But by faking out the Muslim world that way, in reality, he was setting the stage for the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, which was that in 2011 in Tunisia, a guy killed himself and videoed it. A guy lit himself on fire, a fruit seller who had, I guess he'd lost his license to sell fruit or something. So he poured gasoline over his head and lit himself on fire. And it just happened to go viral. And all these people in Tunisia started protesting, and they had a TV network called Al Jazeera that was conveniently highlighting the protests. And pretty soon, all the people of Tunisia were in the streets, and Ben Ali, the military leader, the dictator of Tunisia, stepped down, and the government of Tunisia was overthrown. And then Egypt, right? Egypt had Hosni Mubarak, the military dictator who was in power, and the people of Egypt went out in the streets, and the government of Egypt was overthrown. And Syria and Libya were reduced to civil war. And eventually NATO bombs went in there and they destroyed Libya. And there was a TV network that was promoting this. And it was Al Jazeera, based in Qatar. And there were groups all over the Middle East who were locked and loaded and ready to make it happen. Those were Muslim Brotherhood groups. And the Arab Spring would not have happened without Qatar and without the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was vitally important to the United States in the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was basically a controlled demolition, right? If you have an old building that's falling apart, what are you going to do? Are you just going to let it rot? No, right? Because that's dangerous. It could fall down at some time you don't plan on it and, fall down in a way that you can't control. So it was a controlled demolition. The economic crisis had come. People all over the Middle East had lost their jobs. There was a drought. There was a huge drought on all these people in the countryside. Their farms went under and they fled to the cities. All the major cities in the Middle East were packed full of, unemployed, hungry, desperately poor young men from the countryside. And it was what they call a tinderbox. It was a powder keg. It was going to blow. So in 2011, at the beginning of 2011, the Hillary Clinton State Department and the Obama administration, they lit the fuse and they decided to have a controlled demolition. And this is now well documented. Jared Andrew Cohen, who worked at the Hillary Clinton State Department, worked as the liaison between Twitter and Silicon Valley and the tech monopolies and the State Department. And they made the Tunisian guy, they made that go viral, who lit himself on fire. They made it go viral and they, it was a controlled demolition. And all over the Middle East, the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, and Al Jazeera and social media created these revolutions that led to nothing. They led to absolutely nothing, right? Things in Egypt are today arguably worse than they were under Mubarak. Things in Libya are far worse. Libya once had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. And the Muslim Brotherhood was very key in having that happen. And Qatar was very key in having that happen. But Qatar doesn't like Israel, and Israel doesn't like Qatar. And the Muslim Brotherhood have been longtime friends of the U.S. government, but, and here's the but, they tend to be friends not just of the U.S. government, but of the British government, of the French government, of the German government, and of Europe. And who do the Muslim Brotherhood absolutely hate? Saudi Arabia. The Muslim Brotherhood is illegal in Saudi Arabia. If you're caught with a book by somebody from the Muslim Brotherhood, you can be beheaded. And the Muslim Brotherhood are westernized Muslims. They want to adopt the Western system. The Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, they want to adopt, they want to go back to the 1400s. They want a traditional Wahhabi, Saudi, ancient fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. They have distinctly different views. And in America, it tends to be Democrats who like the Muslim Brotherhood. Zbigniew Brzezinski was a Democrat, and he's the one who cultivated the Muslim Brotherhood as allies, right? And Obama and the Obama administration are the ones that oversaw utilizing the Muslim Brotherhood during the Arab Spring. The Saudis, on the other hand, and there are probably many Republicans who would be horrified to know this, the Saudis tend to be friends with Republicans. Now, that doesn't match. A lot of Republicans who just hate Muslims. That's not true. We Republicans don't like the Saudis. Well, facts are facts, okay? The Bush family was very close to the Saudi royal family, right? Very, very close. I mean, they used to call, there was a member of the Saudi royal family. They nicknamed him Bendahar Bush, right? And you can see the videos. The Bin Laden family, the family of Osama bin Laden, the Saudi royal family, there were, the Bush family and the Saudi family were closer than ever. But Ronald Reagan also really liked the Saudis. So much so that in the early 1980s, there was an official proclamation from the U.S. State Department. We will never allow a revolution in Saudi Arabia. That promise was made, right? After the Islamic Revolution of Iran, there was an uprising in Saudi Arabia by the Shia Muslims. And the Reagan administration officially came out and said, we will never allow a revolution in Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis tend to be Republicans. So much so, this is a wild story, that, in 1984, in the presidential election, Muhammad Ali, the boxer, endorsed Ronald Reagan. Did you know that? This is a fact. Look it up. Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in the 1984 presidential election. Why? Why? Well, Muhammad Ali joined the Nation of Islam, right? And after Malcolm X was killed, he stayed with the Nation of Islam. And after Elijah Muhammad died, Elijah Muhammad's son took over the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad's son converted to being a Wahhabi, right? And Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad changed the name of the Nation of Islam to the Organization of Muslims in America or something like that, and he became a Wahhabi. And Minister Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan quit and started the Nation of Islam as a breakaway. So the group, that Muhammad Ali was in was Wahhabi and was funded by Saudi Arabia. And Wallace Muhammad, before his death, even gave interviews about how he felt that the Saudis had abused their money and pressured him to make the organization that he was the leader of, that had formerly been the Nation of Islam, more Wahhabi. And they were Republicans. And what's left of that organization, that Wallace Muhammad created after his father Elijah Muhammad died, what's left of that organization, even today, votes Republican. I remember when I was living in Cleveland, there were mosques that were mostly African American that supported Republicans in the elections because they were against gay marriage, because they were against abortion, because they wanted black capitalism and small business, but it was really because they were Saudi aligned. The Saudi monarchy tend to be Republicans, and that even in Trump's first term, right? Trump went to Saudi Arabia and pitched the idea of forming an Arab NATO. The Saudis tend to be Republicans. Why? Because what do they buy? What is the relationship? Saudi Arabia sells America oil, and then what do they buy from America? Weapons. They are tied in with the military-industrial complex of America, which tends to be Republicans. The arms manufacturers, the weapons manufacturers tend to be Republican. And so Saudi Arabia is very close to Boeing and General Electric and, the defense contracting element, which tends to vote Republicans. The weapons manufacturers, they tend to be Republican. And the Saudis are Republicans, right? And the Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood don't like each other. And the Muslim Brotherhood doesn't just have a relationship with the CIA, and it tends to be the liberal CIA, not the military-industrial complex, that has a relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. They're also close to Europe. They get along with the British. In fact, many people believe that the British had a lot to do with setting them up to begin with. They get along with the French. They get along with other wings of the government, right? And that this wing of Islam, the westernized Islam, the Qatari and Turkish-backed wing of Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood wing of Islam, is probably the largest wing of Islam in the world at this point. There are far more westernized Sunni Muslims of the Muslim Brotherhood variety than there are Wahhabis, than there are Shia, right? It's the biggest wing of Islam. And that is the wing that Hamas, that's fighting Israel and that they're part of. And that is the wing that was the key ally of the United States during the Arab Spring. Now, I wrote this book about Kamala Harris. I wrote it 4 years before the 2024 election. You'll remember it. And in this book, I talked about why Tulsi Gabbard had used her limited time on the debate stage in the 2020 election to go after Kamala Harris. And I talked about why a lot of people in the military were afraid of Kamala Harris becoming president. Because Kamala Harris was sending out signals that she wanted a new Arab Spring, right? That was basically what was happening. And that the Hillary Clinton State Department had presided over the Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring had been this explosion of revolts and protests across the Middle East, led by the Muslim Brotherhood, fomented by Al Jazeera, fomented by social media. And they were to the benefit of the United States. And that Tulsi Gabbard and Michael Flynn and other people close to the Pentagon represented a wing of the Pentagon that didn't like the fallout. They didn't like all the refugees pouring into Europe. They didn't like ISIS emerging from all that chaos, the Wahhabi terrorist group ISIS. They didn't like all the instability. They did not want another Arab Spring. And that Tulsi Gabbard saw Kamala Harris as a continuation of the Hillary Clinton State Department, that all of Hillary Clinton's donors on Silicon Valley and all of that had all switched. They'd had a meeting in Long Island that was reported on. I covered this in the book, right? Where they switched and they put their money behind Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was the Muslim Brotherhood candidate in the election. She was going to get in there and continue what Hillary Clinton had started with the Arab Spring. And that even Obama was not thrilled about what Hillary Clinton had done. When Obama was leaving office, he said that his best decision as president was when he chose not to bomb Syria. In 2013, they were accusing Syria of a chemical attack, and he negotiated for Syria to give up its chemical weapons, and he didn't bomb them. He said that was his best decision. Hillary Clinton condemned him for that. And he said his worst decision as president was something that Hillary Clinton practically arranged, which was going into Libya. Now, he didn't say it was wrong to invade Libya. He said we went in without a clear plan, but the Libyan conflict was very much the work of Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power, right? I remember when I was at the United Nations. During these years, I was a UN reporter for Press TV. And I remember I went to the press conferences that were done by Samantha Power, who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And I remember at one of her press conferences, she was up there speaking at the podium. And on one side of her, she had a young queer man, a young, teenish, young man with like his hair like combed differently. And he was wearing like punk rock jeans, and he was supposed to give off the vibe of, and he had a piercing, like his ears were pierced, and he gave off the vibe of being a young gay man. And on the other side of the podium, they had a woman of Arab descent in full hijab. And that was not an accident, right? And she was at the podium condemning the Syrian government. And it was like, those were the two wings, the two torpedoes that were used to bring down the Syrian government, bring down the Libyan government, and foment unrest around the world. On the one hand, radical Islamists, right, of the Muslim Brotherhood variety, right? Not Wahhabis, but, the Muslim Brotherhood wing of Islam. On the other one, LGBT, and the westernized young people that are in awe of the Western system and want to dance and drink and party and tend to identify with the LGBT movement. And those were the two torpedoes that U.S. imperialism was using, not just against the Syrian government, the Libyan government, but even, in Russia. They were funding LGBT protesters against Russian President Putin. They were funding Islamists. The USA had fomented the Chechen conflict and used Islamists against the Russian government. And that the Obama administration, their strategy, which would have been continued under the Kamala Harris administration, was to utilize the Muslim Brotherhood and utilize the LGBT movement to create unrest around the world. That was their strategy. But you'll remember the Muslim Brotherhood doesn't like Egypt, doesn't like Israel, right? They are aligned. They are Muslims. And that you'll notice I in my recent talks about Noam Chomsky, I noticed that during the Obama years, Noam Chomsky was almost always an opponent of U.S. regime change operations. But as soon as Obama took office, he supported military intervention in Syria. He supported military intervention in Libya. He even wrote articles claiming that the U.S. government was afraid to let Assad, the Syrian leader, fall because they were afraid of the revolution from below. And at the same time, he continued his harsh criticism of Israel. And my encounter with Noam Chomsky at the UN, he was there at the request of the Arab League. The Arab League, the Arab states paid him to come to the UN and give a speech against Israel. And that the International Socialist Organization, Haymarket Books, the Trotskyites, they had the same position. They were against Israel, but they lined up with the United States in Syria, in Libya, against Russia, everywhere, right? And that during the Obama administration, the Qatari Muslim Brotherhood axis wasn't simply people around the world that have that type of religion. It was a lot of the left. A lot of the left took that position of aligning with the Muslim Brotherhood, wanting to bring down the anti-imperialist governments of the Middle East, hating Iran, but also hating Israel. That was the line. That was the line. And the Obama administration very much courted those kinds of forces, right? And that's the case. I mean, this is one axis within global Islam and within the global current. And a lot of leftists and communists like Noam Chomsky and Amy Goodman and the ISO, International Socialist Organization, they took the Qatari position. I remember during the Arab Spring, I was at one of the founding meetings of the United National Anti-War Committee, UNAC. And I really wish this video could be found because I just want to show this to everybody, right? One of the leaders of Haymarket Books, the Trotskyite International Socialist Organization, got up and gave a speech about how Egypt, the Egyptian revolution, was so amazing. He said, because if this had happened during the Cold War, quote, the Russian Empire would co-opt it and take it over. But Egypt is going to be amazing because there's no more Soviet Union. And you look at what Egypt is today. he couldn't have been more wrong. But that was their line, right? That what was amazing about the Arab Spring is it wasn't led by Russia. It wasn't led by the Soviet Union. It wasn't led by anti-imperialists. It was simply from below. Well, it wasn't from below. It was led by America, and it was led by Qatar, right? And that's who led the Arab Spring, and it led to shit. Libya is in a shithole right now thanks to the Arab Spring, right? Gaddafi's son, who was the only hope the country had, was just murdered. Syria is in the shithole. They're murdering Christians right now, and it's awful what's happening in Syria right now. Right? I mean, the Arab Spring was a nightmare. And it was a nightmare because it was directed by America in alliance with Qatar. It was a controlled demolition. That there had been a drought, the economy had gotten worse. And so rather than let a revolution happen on its own, and perhaps Iran would end up being the leader of it, right? They made sure that the revolution happened on their terms. And it was just a controlled demolition brought to you by social media, brought to you by Qatar, brought to you by Turkey, and brought to you by Silicon Valley and America. And that's what happened. And the results were disastrous. And basically, Tulsi Gabbard, when she was running for president as a Democrat in 2020, she went out of her way to target Kamala Harris on the debate stage because there was a fear of what might happen if Kamala Harris, who was part of the Hillary Clinton State Department, took office. But this gets a little more complicated. Why? Because Israel, at least a lot of Israel, hates the Muslim Brotherhood because the Muslim Brotherhood supports Hamas. Because the Muslim Brotherhood rallies Muslims around the world to oppose Israel. And when Trump has been in office, many times he has floated the idea of declaring the Muslim Brotherhood to be a terrorist organization. Like he's actually said he's considering, hasn't actually done it, designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. That would be a favor to Israel, but it would weaken the United States. You can't be funding and arming a group if you designate them legally as a terrorist organization. And, the Democratic Party and the CIA soft power apparatus have worked very, very hard to cultivate the Muslim Brotherhood as allies. And this Qatar phobia, right? They're accusing Tucker Carlson and anyone else who speaks in support of the Palestinians as being agents of Qatar. That comes from Israel. Israel hates Qatar because Qatar is a Muslim country. But also because of October 7th and because the United States is so alienated from the Muslim world, Qatar itself has pivoted in a more anti-imperialist direction, right? Qatar is, hosting and friendlier to Russia and friendlier to the BRICS countries, right? And that the relationship between American intelligence and the American deep state and the Muslim Brotherhood is very strained right now because, especially since October 7th, the United States is fully backing Israel. The United States is even not allowing protests to support the Palestinians on the college campuses. I've talked about how the Ivy League schools in America, Brzezinski talks about in his book, The Grand Chessboard, the Ivy League schools are one of the most important soft power institutions for American imperialism. People from all over the world come to Harvard and Yale to study and become partners, be groomed as partners of American imperialism around the world. And it's important that at Harvard and Yale and Columbia that students from the Middle East see pro-Palestine demonstrations, see Muslim Americans practicing their faith, and learn that even though America supports Israel, we still allow dissent. It's good to be a Muslim in America. But there's so many donors to Columbia and Yale and Harvard that are hardcore Zionists that will never allow it. They had to crack down on the protests, and that was a huge problem. And the credibility of America in the Muslim world decreased. And so the Muslim Brotherhood and the Qatari axis in the Middle East is pivoting. They're closer to Europe, and they're especially more willing to negotiate with Russia, to do business with Russia. The Qatari axis and the Muslim Brotherhood axis is pivoting away from America because America is so solidly in bed with Israel. And that's what all this is about. And that the Obama administration, the Hillary Clinton State Department, and Kamala Harris's wing of the state, their strategy is to utilize the Muslim Brotherhood as foot soldiers of American imperialism. The Trump administration seems, so desperate to, boost up and support the Likud wing of Israeli politics that they can't allow it, right? And Trump has even considered declaring the Muslim Brotherhood to be a terrorist organization. So that's what's going on here. Qatar is not an anti-imperialist country, but it is a country of Muslims that has been aligned and useful to the United States. And the United States has burned so many bridges with the Muslim world that Qatar is pivoting kind of away from the United States. And Qatar has always been pro-Palestinian, and it appears that, Qatar is now pivoting in a more anti-U.S. direction. Saudi Arabia has even pivoted in a less pro-U.S. direction. The United States is becoming very, very isolated because our political elite are just so scared to do anything that would anger Israel. The USA was hoping under the Obama administration that they could arrange to bring down the Islamic Republic of Iran, kind of like how the Soviet Union was brought down. The reformist wing of Iranian politics was riding high. Rouhani was the president, a reformist who wanted free market capitalism, who wanted to make friends with America and back away from the Islamic Revolution's principles. He signed the Iran nuclear deal, which Israel opposed. And the idea was that the inflow of American business into Iran would weaken the feelings that, the most Iranians, I think 2/3 of Iranians were born after the Islamic Revolution. That was the idea. But then Trump got into office and murdered Iran's top general and national hero, Qasem Soleimani, ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. And so any hope that the U.S. had for, expanding the moderate wing of the Islamic Republic and expanding the reformist camp that would get into office and gradually be like Gorbachev and just throw in the towel and dismantle the Islamic Republic, any hope that the USA had of that happening is over. And Iran elected a hardliner president, Ibrahim Raisi, who I had the honor of interviewing. And then he died under mysterious circumstances. And their current president is a bit of a moderate, but the Republic, the people of Iran are in a hardliner mode, right? And, the USA basically just sent all of its allies in Iran out to get killed, right? It basically sent out a signal to all of its allies in Iran, go out and riot, and they burned police stations and they killed police officers, and now they've been taken care of. And it looks like the Islamic Republic of Iran and the more hardliner, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist wing of it is secure in power now because of the fact that Israel didn't want the Iran nuclear deal. And it looks like the way U.S. imperialism is at this point beholden to Israel has gotten the USA to work against its own overall imperialist interests. And we're in a weird situation. So that's what all you need to understand all of this, right? I wrote this book about Kamala Harris in 2020. And 4 years later, the day Kamala Harris became the nominee for president, it was banned from Amazon. And on the very same day, this book talks a whole lot about Tulsi Gabbard, representing the wing of the military and deep state that's afraid of another Arab Spring, why Kamala Harris would bring that Arab Spring, why she was selected psychologically. I wrote this book, and the day it was banned is also the day Tulsi Gabbard was put on the Clear Skies terrorism list, right? That they retaliated it against my book by taking it off of Amazon. And they retaliated against Tulsi Gabbard on the same day, the very same day, because they knew Tulsi Gabbard was an enemy of Kamala Harris. And I wrote the book basically explaining what the shadow war in the back room was about and what what was going on there and how Kamala Harris wanted to continue the Hillary Clinton State Department project of using the Muslim Brotherhood and aligning with Qatar to create chaos in the Middle East. I wrote all of this, and I wrote the book explaining why Tulsi Gabbard was an enemy of Kamala Harris, right? And right now they're trying to oust Tulsi Gabbard as intelligence director, right? So all of this is interesting. And I wanted to use this broadcast. I gave this stream a provocative title. Qatar is not the enemy, right? Qatar is a country that is generally in the imperialist camp and has funded the Muslim Brotherhood that does bad things. But right now, the USA is so beholden to Israel, and Qatar, as a Muslim country and as the main funder of the Muslim Brotherhood, is anti-Israel. Qatar is going in different directions right now. And that's the point. But it's more complicated than you realize. There is nuance to all of this. And so I wanted to make this stream tonight to kind of give context to the kind of Qatar obsession and Qatar phobia that we're seeing among the neocon right, where all of this came from. And I hope that you all have found this to be informative. So on that note, we'll do the roll call. And now I will start answering questions. If you have a question, please send it via Buy Me a Coffee. That is the best way to send your question. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. That's the best way to send your question. But we'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering questions. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got St. David's from Bermuda. Names and locations. Penny in Minnesota, Ryan in Kansas City, Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Good to see you. John in Florida, Chad in Spokane, Washington, the seasoned noob in China. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Alex in Brazil, the little Beirut of Oregon, Scott in Pennsylvania, Mr. Charles in Brooklyn. Good to see you, sir. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? We got Jacob in Wisconsin. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Raphael in Glasgow. Your questions first, Raphael. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Carolyn and Dario in Brooklyn. How are you? Good to see you. The South. Malcolm Glass in Trent, UK. Auckland, New Zealand. Amway in India. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. We got buddies. Very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. The old man of Drayton Valley, Alberta. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Greetings in the chat. Very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very good, folks. Well, listen, I got to tell you, my goal is to publish my book tonight, to submit it tonight. I spent the day with my manuscript going over it. This new book that is about to be published will blow your mind. If you liked my previous work, if you liked some of the themes that we've done on previous streams, you're going to love the book that I'm about to publish. And I spent my day going over my manuscript. It was a slow day in terms of work, and so I was able to go over my manuscript today. This is going to be a powerful book. And if you like the kind of stuff we talk about on this channel, you're going to love this upcoming book that I wrote. The book I wrote in Minneapolis mainly. I'm just doing the final edits, and it should be out within the next few days. I went on Academic Agent today. It aired today. I recorded 3 episodes on Friday. On Thursday. That was pretty cool. We got a lot of good stuff going on. We got John McCarthy in Chicago. He sent a question. I will say I really need more people to buy me a coffee. I really do. I need more people to send in questions. So if you can send in questions via Buy Me a Coffee, that would be great. That would be great because I need more people to send in questions about anything. Give me something to talk about. I think we got like one Rumble rant that has come in. Yeah, one has come in. But yeah, if more people can send some questions via Buy Me a Coffee, that would be great. Now, in light of the fact that, we've in previous years, and I wrote the whole Kamala Harris book that was banned from Amazon, and then we ended up getting restored. It's still on Amazon, and that we ended up distributing in bulk at the Democratic Convention in 2024 and all of that. I noticed that Kim Iverson had made a video about the reboot of Kamala Harris. So while I'm waiting for more people to send in questions via Buy Me a Coffee and ask questions for the second half of the show, I'm going to put on Kim Iverson, a friend of ours. I've gone on her show many times at this point, 5 or 6, 7, 8 times at this point. I've been on her show many times. Kim Iverson is awesome. I'm going to put on Kim Iverson's video about the reboot of Kamala Harris. So here we go.
Apparently, Kamala Harris was so effective at campaigning that the Democratic Party is using her platform, her people, her infrastructure to pave the way for future campaigning for the next generation. This just kind of goes along with the delusions that Democrats have had about Kamala the entire time. Things like she excites the Democratic base, she appeals to moderates and progressives, she's more qualified than past presidents were at the same exact stage. They kept saying these types of things over and over and over again, even though she was collapsing in the polls, totally underwater. Her campaign imploded. Nobody believed it, but they still kept force-feeding that, and she lost. She lost bigly to Donald Trump. Now, they've rebranded Kamala HQ to now just headquarters. This was the hype video they released. So then Kamala Harris does a little explainer video because she's so great at explaining things.
Ukraine is a country in Europe. Russia is a bigger country.
Here is what the new unveiling is for the Democratic Party.
Kamala HQ is turning into headquarters, and it's where you can go online to get basically the latest of what's going on, and also to meet and revisit with some of our great Courageous leaders.
Even her explainer video was like, wah, wah. Democrats are just looking to lose again, aren't they? Is that what they're like angling? They just like losing? They get off on it or something? Because if they try to put her back in the spotlight as the leader of the Democratic Party, they are going to lose and lose bigly, even though everybody's very angry with Trump right now with the Epstein files, with how American citizens are being shot and killed by the government. I think a lot of people are now just being turned off by the idea of voting at all. We're going to see a decline in voting in general, a decline in the participation of democracy, because people are going to be thinking, what's the point? And honestly, at this point, what is the point?
That's Kim Iverson. I have maintained that they have tried to shove Kamala Harris down our throats for so long because the fact that she is controlled, basically. She's somebody who has been psychologically profiled, and they know how to push her buttons, and she is in the control of the people that ran the Hillary Clinton State Department. They know how to manipulate her. If you look at her life story and how it lines up, it's very similar to Samantha Powers. It's very similar to Amy Klobuchar. If you look at her damage and her history and all that, she is somebody they know how to control. And that's the case I make in this book. And I talk about the psychological profiles of presidents and what motivates them. And I talk about the Arab Spring, and I talk about her background. Her father was a communist. But she hates his guts and she's estranged from him. And he wrote an essay denouncing her campaign. That's her father kind of in the background there. And I wrote this book, and this book was a big deal. I mean, I have it on good authority that it was in her office, that the vice presidential office of Kamala Harris apparently had a copy of this book in it at one point. I got that that information from somebody else. And that this book, when they banned it, people wanted to know what it was about. It exploded in interest. Tens of thousands of copies of this book have sold after, InfoWars did segments about it and stuff, and so with all the money coming in from the book, we decided to distribute it. And shout out to Phil, shout out to John, shout out to Gabby. This book was distributed in bulk at the Democratic National Convention as part of CPI's intervention and letting the Democrats know who Kamala Harris really was. And this book made a splash. I'm really proud of it. It's one of our great operations as the Center for Political Innovation. We know a lot about Kamala Harris. And this book has a lot about Tulsi Gabbard in it too. And Tulsi Gabbard is an interesting figure. I noticed that Megyn Kelly is defending Tulsi Gabbard right now. I will put on, so Megyn Kelly in this video kind of defends Tulsi Gabbard. There's a campaign to oust Tulsi Gabbard from the Trump administration right now. And it's not clear what it's about. They're mad that she went to Georgia, where Trump is investigating possible election fraud. And here's a conversation Megyn Kelly had about the ouster of Tulsi Gabbard, why they're trying to drive her out of the Trump administration, which I think is very, very dangerous. This is Megyn Kelly.
Started by Hillary Clinton.
Why?
She started the Tulsi because Tulsi was a rising star within Democratic politics. She had all the boxes checked. She was a woman. She was a minority. She was the first this and the first that. And she was a combat vet, beautiful, well-spoken, amazing. And then she started to be kind of open-minded to what Bernie Sanders was saying, and maybe had some problems with the Hillary Clinton messaging and having Hillary shoved down our throat as the Democratic nominee back in 2016.
Yes.
And spoke up about it and started to make enemies in the party because of that. And then was outraged when she found out the DNC cheated on behalf of Hillary to try to make sure she got the nomination and screwed Bernie. And she was angry, and a rift was formed. Then Hillary Clinton called her a Russian asset, just like Hillary Clinton's campaign was the one that made up that Donald Trump was a Russian asset.
Dossier, the Russia hoax.
Her campaign made up all the stuff about there being a server in Trump Tower, and Don Jr. was using it to communicate. Those were lies made up by the Clinton campaign. Hillary Clinton, she was the first. Those were lies made up by the Clinton campaign.
Let's pause here. So basically what happened during the 2016 election is that Hillary Clinton and her staff and her team decided that the new technique was that, I guess, McCarthyism is too far off in the American memory, that if anyone looks like an opponent of what she and the regime change apparatus were planning, right? I talked about Samantha Power and the gay kid on one side and the Islamist girl on the other side, that if anyone challenged their regime change agenda, the main thing to do was call him an agent of Russia. And they did that to Trump. And now we know it's a hoax. It's a complete hoax. And they did it to Tulsi Gabbard. And it was a complete hoax against her. And she sued Hillary Clinton and actually won money from her in court. She won in court proving she was not an agent of Russia. And then once Tulsi Gabbard was in, the best thing that has happened so far in the Trump administration is they've released loads of documents proving that the whole idea of Russian meddling in the U.S. election was a complete fraud. And Tulsi Gabbard released those documents that then enabled Donald Trump to have his meeting with Russian President Putin in Alaska. Trump couldn't have that meeting unless they had proven that there was no Russian meddling. And it appears that now that there's some kind of investigation going on into the Georgia election fraud, they are freaked out and they're angry and they want Tulsi Gabbard gone. I think that's a sign that as much as Tulsi Gabbard has, disappointed me in regards to not speaking up about Maduro and regime change in Venezuela, and I feel like, again, it's not coming from a good place. I was hoping Tulsi Gabbard would do more to stop the wars, etc. It appears that she's either been unable to behind closed doors, or maybe she's not trying to. I don't know. I don't know what's happening behind closed doors. But for some reason, they want her out. I think they would like to remove Trump in general. And Trump, has been an awful president, I'll say, in this first term. I'm not impressed. But the fact that they're now, whipping up hysteria against Tulsi Gabbard right now, it makes me feel like something is happening in the back room. Another thing I wanted to say, I'll just throw this out there, is the Minneapolis stuff is related to all of this, right? Because the politics of Ilhan Omar hated Gaddafi. Ilhan Omar hated the Syrian government. Ilhan Omar hates Russia, but she hates Israel also. And that the politics of the Somalis that they have brought in, the 80,000 Somalis in Minneapolis, is the politics of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Minneapolis thing is related to all of this about Qatar too, right? That they have the Muslim Brotherhood westernized Islamic view. That's the view of the Somali Muslims in Minneapolis. But let's continue with Megyn Kelly's video here.
Clinton absolutely loved making up lies in her campaign about the Russians interfering against anybody who she didn't like or wanted to undermine. Tulsi was just one of them. Then Tulsi, an independent thinker, quite obviously, winds up leaving the party. And then she says, this war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine didn't have to happen. If we had just listened for a minute to what Putin was saying about how it was genuinely important to him that Ukraine not be, that NATO not be expanded by allowing Ukraine potentially to join it, this whole thing could potentially have been avoided. And was it really so important to us that we not say that? Couldn't we have said that? Couldn't we have listened to him? The other major nuclear power in the world, maybe that was worth more than a day's worth of thought. That is really what is used against her. If you go back and you look at why is she a Russian asset?
Okay.
That's it. The made up Hillary Clinton stuff, this, and then she met with.
Yeah. Let's keep in mind, if it wasn't for the Russiagate hoax, the war in Ukraine would never have happened. Keep that in mind. If it wasn't for the Russiagate hoax, the war in Ukraine would not be happening right now. When Trump took office, he was on the defensive, accused of being soft on Putin. He couldn't de-escalate. He ended up sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. And then in 2020, the 2020 election, the FBI used the Russia hysteria to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story. And so Biden won the election because a major news story was suppressed on grounds that it was Russian propaganda, even though we now know that Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And when Biden got in, he escalated U.S., weaponry and was basically the Ukrainian military was going in. They were going to slaughter all the people in the Eastern republics. And at that point, Russia had to move in, right? So keep in mind that there are hundreds of thousands of people who would be alive today who are dead right now, Ukrainians, Russians, who wouldn't have died if it wasn't for the Russiagate hysteria, the lies of the Hillary Clinton State Department, the lies of the Obama administration claiming that Russia somehow interfered in our elections. Now we have the proof that Russia had everything they needed. They knew Hillary Clinton was mentally ill. They knew Hillary Clinton was addicted to painkillers. They knew Hillary Clinton was a basket case, and they sat on it. And they sat on it because they didn't want to interfere in their elections. They chose not to interfere in our elections. They could have helped Trump, and they didn't. Right? So, keep that in mind, that this Russiagate lie, this hoax, is the basis of the Ukraine war. It's the basis of everything. Tulsi Gabbard exposed it and seems to be involved in some kind of investigation that Trump is doing. And now all of a sudden the neocon establishment is circling its wagons. They want her out. I want her in.
Assad, an enemy by far, sure, it's no question. And so they say, you know, she's got like, I guess she's getting her marching orders from Assad.
Okay.
Putin. I mean, Trump himself decided to open up negotiations with Kim Jong-un. I mean, like,
Of course, which
than
makes
Bashar al-Assad.
perfect sense to me, because what are you going to do? Diplomacy means you talk to your enemies. Isn't that more important than talking to your allies? Like,
Yeah. So, you know, right now, I don't know what's going to happen next, but, you know, they want to oust Tulsi Gabbard, and it's not coming from a good place. I'll just tell you that much. And I don't know what's happening with the negotiations. I keep hearing good news about, you know, about Kirill Dmitriev and Russia, U.S. negotiations, but we'll see. You know, and the Qatar hysteria, I wanted to just explain what was going on there, because it's, you know, it's Qatar has been pivoting in a good direction. And, you know, the United States has kind of burned its bridge with Qatar as it's more and more beholden to Israel. And the Democrats want a better relationship with them. Republicans want a better relationship with Saudi Arabia. I wanted to give people all this background information because, again, there's a lot of ignorance. That's it. So if you want to send in a question, please buy me a coffee. A few people have. I need more people to do it. But one question came in. So there's, I guess I said I would answer. So please, buymeacoffee.com is the way to send a question. Buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. I did say I would answer Raphael first. I was going to answer another question first, but we've had 3 that have come in. So yeah, I guess we'll do Raphael first. I was going to answer another one, but he says, Raphael says, what was Bella Dodd's problem? Was she sincere or a grifter? I don't know who Bella Dodd was, but I looked it up, right? Bella Dodd. Right. So Bella Dodd was a teacher, a labor union and lawyer activist, and a member of the Communist Party USA, who became a vocal anti-communist. Okay. I mean, I really don't know much about her. You know, I just don't. Right. I have not studied her work. Is she the one that the trad Catholics will always make reference to? Is that, you know, is she that one? Right. You know, I don't really appreciate wreckers. I'll just be honest. I don't appreciate, it's one thing if you develop a disagreement, right? If you're in a political organization or a movement and you disagree and you turn against them and you say, well, look, we just are parting ways here because we disagree. But this kind of like tell all, like, I'll expose this evil group, you know, wrecking is not a positive thing. And I mean, it looks like this woman was a wrecker. Somebody was in the CPUSA, and when McCarthyism hit, she, you know, became a, you know, and you know, I don't know much about her, but I'm not impressed. And, you know, she wasn't the only one, right? Like this. I'd never heard of her, actually. I didn't know her by name, but there was another guy. There was a guy named Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers was one of the most famous ones of these. Whittaker Chambers, who became the editor of Time magazine. He'd been in the Communist Party in the 1920s, and he's the one who claimed that Alger Hiss was secretly a member of the party. And they could never prove that, but Alger Hiss did commit perjury. I think it was to protect one of his relatives who was gay or something like that. And, you know, they threw Alger Hiss in prison. And that there was a lot of this during the McCarthy years of people that, you know, that during the late 1930s and during the Second World War, the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States against fascism. So being in the Communist Party was pretty accepted because Roosevelt had, you know, a good friendship with the Soviet Union, because Henry Wallace was the vice president who was a socialist and, you know, had, you know, praised Stalin, and the Soviet Union were our allies, and it was okay to be a communist. In 1946, the Cold War began, and suddenly being a communist made you public enemy number one. And there were a number of people who'd become communists during the Popular Front era, when it was trendy. And suddenly it was not a trendy thing to do. And they were out of there. And a lot of them, I think that song, the Song of the Old Communist, talks about how they betrayed us for medals. And that there were a layer of people who did that. Whittaker Chambers. It sounds like this woman. I'd never heard of Bella Dodd before, but there's many of them, right? There were many people who wrote tell-all stories about, you know, about the Communist Party and, you know, all that. And there's some, like, there's some like quotes that are attributed to Gus Hall that are hilarious. Gus Hall was the leader of the Communist Party starting in like 1960 until his death in 2000. And like there's places on the internet he's quoted as saying, the Christians are always talking about the blood, the blood. Well, I say we give it to them. I say we kill every last priest. And he never said that. And in fact, Gus Hall said the opposite. He famously said, we need to tone down opposition to religion. He said, our war is not with God, it's with the bourgeoisie. And in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the Communist Party really embraced liberation theology and Catholicism in particular because of Latin America. So like Gus Hall didn't say that. But, there's all these there's a lot of hysterical, that's how these things work. You want to make yourself special. You want to sell books. You have the inside story. Look, we see this now. There's this woman who she grinds my gears. She doesn't grind my gears because of what she's saying necessarily. She grinds my gears because she doesn't know what she's talking about. And she doesn't have any special inside knowledge. This woman, she's like a libertarian and she runs Socialism Saturday. And she talks about communism and she just says basic stuff like she has this special inside scoop, and her right-wing audience is so fucking ignorant, right, that she gets on there. Like she had a stream the other day. The communists are calling a protest on this special day, May 1st. May 1st is very special to the Red Menace. And she gets on there and she like gets on PSL's website and reads articles, and she acts like she has this special inside knowledge about what communists are. One time I went on one of her streams, and I pointed out that PSL is funded by Roy Singham, because it is, right? Roy Singham, the businessman, the pro-China billionaire, funds PSL. And she panicked and she said, you can't say that, you're spreading conspiracy theories. And she blocked me from her chat. I know more about this than she does. Fox News has done stories about how Roy Singham funds the PSL. She doesn't have any inside knowledge. She's just making cheap, dumb scare porn for conservatives. And that's what the overwhelming majority of ex-communist tell-alls are. They're very stupid, right? One of them by David Horowitz, the neocon. His book talks about how, like, when we were in school, he went to this communist, educational program in the 1950s. And at that program, all we read was The Crucible by Arthur Miller. Really? Really? That's all you read was The Crucible by Arthur Miller? Like, that's the only communist book out there? Give me a break. Give me a break. Just stuff like that. Where it's just like, they're just like trying to appeal to like a conservative stereotype of what a communist is. And they're not learning any of this, right? And I was in the communist groups for many, many years, and I know why they're messed up and why they don't have a future and why we have to pivot in a new direction with innovationism. But I also don't bring with me a bunch of childish anti-communism. I understand what they believe and what they don't believe and why they're limited. But these people, they're not trying to teach anyone anything. They're just trying to reinforce right-wing anti-communist stereotypes, and they're trying to make scare porn. And this has been around for a while. There was a guy called Former Soviet Citizen here in New York City for a while who would go to communist rallies and be like, I am from USSR, we kill millions of people. And then the communists would start talking and say, really that Former Soviet Citizen, you can find his YouTube channel, and he was one of the, there was a lot of this, right? A lot of this right-wing scare porn that consists of somebody somewhere doesn't agree with you about communism and thinks communism is good. Doesn't that make you angry? Vote Republican. And it infuriates me because I take this very seriously, and I've spent my whole life studying this stuff. I'm mad at the communist groups because they don't, they're not really fighting imperialism. They're not building a mass movement. They're just foot soldiers of the Democrats, right? I'm mad at these anti-communist folks because they're, perpetuating ignorance. And we just have to forget about communism, and we have to do the innovationist movement. We're building an anti-imperialist movement, fighting for working families, and the communist groups have turned into woke nightmares, and they're their own train wreck, and they're not our problem. And the anti-communism of Americans, most of Americans who don't like communism, they think woke people, right? They don't like woke people. Well, I don't like woke people either, right? Woke people annoy me. So we need to just kind of forget about the communism, anti-communism argument. Both sides don't know what the hell they're talking about, and we just need to just do our own thing. We're doing our own movement. We're building innovationism. a movement to rebuild America and fight in the interest of working families. And we're doing that on the basis of understanding the Soviet Union and its achievements, understanding Iran, understanding Libya and Gaddafi, understanding Bolivarianism, understanding what imperialism and globalism are all about. We're building a new movement with communism as part of our history, as part of our heritage. We understand it with a level of depth none of these people have. And that's actually what my new book is going to be about. I'm going to finish this book very shortly. I spent my day editing it. I have to put the graphics in and all of that. But my goal is to, before I go to sleep tonight, make sure my new book is published, because it's a really important book that you all will love. You're all going to love this new book. The title is going to blow your mind. The title is going to blow your mind. And the book itself is going to blow your mind as well. I really enjoyed writing it. It's a really important piece. So there you go. So thank you, Raphael. I hope I gave you a sufficient answer, even though I'd never heard of Bella Dodd before. John McCarthy said, I think it's too simplistic to apply old rules and patterns to the current situation. I agree. Russia and China are both making great progress in recruiting Islamic nations, both Brotherhood and otherwise, to the Belt and Road and BRICS, getting them to look over differences for win-win cooperation. Exactly. Yeah. The USA has alienated them. Just because leaders and tendencies were agents of imperialism in the past doesn't mean that they continue to be. Exactly. Illiberal formations. I think labels are counterproductive. The new world is not the old world. When it really gets down to it, the Muslim Brotherhood, even though they believe in capitalism, even though they functioned as foot soldiers of imperialism, they are an illiberal organization, right? They have illiberal beliefs. They are Islamists, right? You know, they don't believe everything's a matter of opinion. They don't believe right and wrong doesn't exist. They have certain principles that they are very, very solidly committed to. And one of those principles is opposing Israel. And that has put them at odds with the USA. And the USA can't maintain its relationship with them like it once did, right? And that's the point, right? We got to understand this, and that yeah, now Qatar is getting friendlier to the BRICS and Russia and China because the USA is just burning the bridge. And it's kind of like how the USA couldn't tolerate the pro-Palestine protests at Harvard and Columbia and Yale, even though that would be in American imperialism's ultimate interest. And this is the contradiction of the period. And we have to understand that, and that the Muslim Brotherhood was an illiberal formation, like a counter gang, pumped up and used to fight against communism in the Middle East, but it ultimately has its own agenda and its own interests. And now, you know, it's no longer controlled by the United States in the way it once was. And it looks like Trump has alienated them so much, and Israel has really just alienated them so much from their previous alliance with the United States, that anything is possible, John. And that's the point of my stream tonight. I just wanted people to understand the history there, and that I mean, it's fascinating to me. But for the longest time, my position as a leftist was that Israel is just a tool of U.S. imperialism. I'm wrong about that. If Israel was just a tool of U.S. imperialism would be able to maintain its relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. And it looks like they ain't. It looks like the Muslim Brotherhood, it looks like Saudi Arabia even doesn't. You know, the USA has been captured by Israel so solidly that it is working against its overall interests as an imperialist power. And that is amazing, right? And we're watching this, that Israel has at this point captured the United States to the point that the United States can't tell Israel no on anything. And that's kind of the defining aspect of our period. And yeah, I think that's really important. So I agree with everything you said there, John, everything. And then this next one, I was going to answer this first, but I will answer it now. Why is it that there was so much effing controversy over the Super Bowl halftime show? Seems like the Trump camp is being dominated by what's essentially nativist crap, like this actual tweet from a MAGA person, and he quotes a tweet, you know, that I'm not going to repeat on here. Well, look, I watched the Super Bowl halftime show with my wife. My wife is you know, from Guatemala, and she really appreciated it. She was very moved by it. You know, I watched it, and, you know, it was entertaining, right? I don't speak Spanish fluently, but, you know, first of all, I saw Laura Loomer tweeted that the entire thing was in Spanish, not a single thing in English. That's not true. Lady Gaga sang in English. Lady Gaga did her segment. It was in English, right? Ricky Martin did Spanish, and Bad Bunny was all in Spanish, but there was actually someone singing in English. Lady Gaga is also white. Laura Loomer said, not a single white person, not a single person in English. False. Lady Gaga, right? So that wasn't true. But look, there are layers to this. Okay. Overall, I sympathize with the person who sent the question. Like, you know, why are you offended by a Super Bowl halftime show, you know, that highlighted, you know, a rising ethnic minority and, lingual minority in America. It's not the end of the world, right? Okay, people, I mean, why does that offend you? Right? And I kind of understand what's going on here, and I'm going to take some risks here, even though I think that people shouldn't go out of their way to be offended. That's something my friend Noah has pointed out a lot, is that he sees this among both sides. People kind of go out of their way to be offended. People make fake tweets to like share with each other. Look at what this other side is saying. It's not even a real tweet. But like one rule in life, no matter what side you're on, don't go out of your way to be offended, right? There are plenty of things in life that are really offensive. So you shouldn't go out of your way to be offensive. I mean, this was intended to be an FU to Donald Trump. Okay. Let's not pretend otherwise. This was done because of ICE. This was done because of Donald Trump and his, anti-immigration stance, and Latin parents being afraid of their kids being picked up by ICE, parents being afraid their kids being afraid their parents might not be there when they get home from school. This was done as a gesture showing support for the Latin American and Spanish-speaking community in light of the ICE raids, in light of the White House, and it was done as kind of an FU to the White House. So, if you're going to do something that's intended to be an FU to the White House, people who like the White House are going to be offended by it, right? But I do want to point this out, right? And I don't want to come across, please do not misinterpret what I'm saying here. I am not saying that the grievances of these kind of folks are anywhere near the grievances that the Black community has, the grievances that the Latin community has, the grievances that the Asian community has. Look, the Arab American, the Muslim American community, there's plenty of people in America who have the right to be upset about things that were done to them and their community because of their race, because of their religion, because of the language that they speak, right? There's plenty of people in this country who have a right to be angry, right? Slavery, Jim Crow, racial profiling, the Black community can be very angry about that. The Latin community, you can talk about how, Texas was stolen from Mexico. You can talk about the discrimination and, the way ICE is grabbing people, because they look like they might be Spanish speaking. And yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things to talk about, right? And if you're white in America, you have a plus, right? Your life is a little bit easier because you're white, and as hard as your life might be, it would be worse if you were not white, and it's important to recognize that. And I'm not trying to deny that, as many people do. And I'm not, that said, right? And here's the but, right? And this is going to upset everybody. I will say that, nobody likes being told they're the bad guy, right? And look, the Black community has dealt with an endless amount of that and still does, right? And the Spanish speaking community, Trump has made them the bad guy, right? It's the immigrants are taking your jobs, they're rapists. Nobody likes being told they're the bad guy. And I never in a million years did I ever think that I would feel that way, but it's only really after I moved to New York, I got in situations where I was tired of being told that I was the bad guy because of my ethnic background. And I never thought in a million years that would be the case. And what I've experienced is nothing compared to what people of color have experienced, but it does get old, right? If you're in an atmosphere where you're constantly being told, you're white, you're white, you're white, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you have privilege, people get tired of that, right? And like the Black community has gotten tired of what they had to deal with. And that, the issue obviously is the system. It's not individuals, right? And that, there were times after I've been in New York, right, where I've gotten really tired of it. There have been instances where it just it gets old, right? And it gets old. And that if you have people in middle America that are already feeling victimized economically, that are already feeling like, like the world has changed a lot since when they were kids, right? These tend to be older folks, right? And they felt like they probably, the way they interpreted that Super Bowl halftime show was the Super Bowl halftime show was national television in America saying you're bad. That's what they interpreted it as. That's not what it was. It was meant to be a salute to the Latin American and Spanish speaking communities. It was meant to be a pushback against the ICE raids and all of that. But they took it as, on national television, they're telling me I'm bad because I'm white, which is not what it was meant to say. That's how they took it, right? And if you are being told you're bad because you're white, right? Which I never thought in a million years anyone would actually ever say, right? I was, I mean, conservatives talk about reverse racism and stuff, and I would roll my eyes. And, I had a friend who was a friend of mine when I was just a regular leftist. I had a friend of mine who would like, the Black Hebrew Israelites. Have you ever heard of them? They're like a black nationalist group that like stands on street corners and rants against white people. And I had a friend who was white, and he used to stand on street corners and like applaud for them to like be edgy, right? Be like, yeah, I hate white people too, or whatever. And I used to think that was funny, but I've gotten to the point that, there has been some stuff where it's just like the woke mantra of white people's lives are too good. No white person has ever suffered ever, right? Everyone who's white, their life is perfect. Everyone who's white is rich. It gets a little old after a while. Okay, it does. I mean, it gets a little old. And, I understand, though, that obviously what people of color have had to deal with is far worse. And I'm not pretending that, but, I'll be honest, it does get a little old, and I would never have felt that way until I moved to New York City. But after I've lived in New York City, I first came to this city in 2010. And it was after I came to this city, suddenly it just got to be a bit much, it just got to be a bit much. I remember, here's the story, right? I was in a political organization years ago, and, they had like a very small, like, we moved to a new office. We didn't have much space for books, right? But there was like a small library, right? And, and I remember, there was a friend of mine, who used to bring me used books that he bought. He was a guy who he would spend his free days going to used bookstores, and he brought me like a stack of books, right? And one of the books he brought me that day, right? I don't know why he brought it to me. It was actually a book, I believe, written by a black comedian, if I'm not mistaken, called White People. It was a book by a black comedian. It was called White People. And he had a stack of different books he thought I'd be interested in. He would bought them for a nickel or whatever in the bargain bin at the used bookstore. He gave me like 5 or 6 books. I think one was called Freud Was Wrong. It was huge. And another one was, he gave me this book that it was called White People, right? And I think it was written by a black person. And I just happened to have this book. And, my friend, went away. The stack of books was still on the table. And I was just in this organization. A woman walked into the office, not going to say her name, who was like an important leader of the organization, African-American. She walked into the office and she saw this book on the table with the name White People. And she walked over to the table. What is this? She was so angry. And I was visibly afraid that there was a book, God forbid, a book called White People in our office. And I was just like, what? And it was and luckily there was another black person there who stepped in and kind of made a joke out of it and talked her down. She was ready to just rip my head off for the fact that there was a book that was simply called White People in the office. That's bullshit. All right. Now, obviously, people of color can tell you some stories they've been through that are a lot scarier and involve guns and police. And, so I'm not saying that means whites are the victims or something, but, stuff like that is bullshit, right? If my friend brings me a book written, I believe it was written by a black comedian, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really know who wrote it, called White People. And just a book called White People was offensive. Another thing that happened, right? I remember I was in this particular organization, and they were doing like educational programs, right? They did an educational program. It was about the media, right? And so I went to it, and it was a room about 20, 30 people, right? About 20, 30 people. And there were 2 or 3 speakers about how media is biased. Fine, right? So, they're giving speeches, and one particular woman who was a speaker there, right? Who frequently accused people of anti-Semitism, right? She frequently was calling people anti-Semitic, right? And she was, of Jewish descent, anti-Zionist though, right? But, I remember, and I was new in New York City, and I'm in this room, and, whatever. And I remember she's reading her speech about how the media is biased, right? And at this point, I was an atheist, mind you. This is before my religious conversion. This is in about 2012. So I'm sitting in the audience as she's giving this speech. She's going through her speech about how the media is biased and all of that. And then she starts talking about history. And then she says, she looks right at me and like almost glares at me when she's speaking. Back in the Middle Ages, it was the church that played the role of media. Right? And she just like glares at me as she says this. And I was an atheist at this time, mind you. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was saying my ancestors weren't stupid enough to believe in Christianity, but that's what she was saying. She was baiting me for being a Christian. I was a bad person and I was an atheist at the time, but I was from the Midwest, right? I must have been in the Klan, right? Half the people from Ohio, all the people in Ohio believe Jews have horns and tails. I was told by another person in this organization. She was clearly just baiting me on the fact that I was from a Christian background. That shit gets old after a while. Right. And if you're in an atmosphere, where, the mantra is constantly anything associated with white people is inherently bad. Anything associated with Christianity is inherently bad. It gets old after a while. It really gets old after a while. And, let's be real. Right. And that's not the answer. The answer is not, obviously, yes, compared to what people of color go through. Like, and I'll say that 100 times. I am not, but if the mantra of wokeism is white people bad, Christianity bad, you think you're going to win over people, right? I know it's edgy among like young hipsters to be like, oh yeah, I hate white people, white privilege, my parents are racist. But like among the bulk of the American people who are white, saying white people bad is going to get old after a while. And that's not fair, right? It's not fair compared to what people of color. I mean, people of color have been told they're bad by the media, and I'm not denying any of that. But I'm just telling you that the edgy woke mantra of white people bad, Christians bad, it gets old after a while. It really, really does. And so to a lot of Trump supporters, they mistakenly and wrongly interpreted that Super Bowl halftime show as white people bad. And that's not what it was saying. But a lot of woke people do say stuff like that constantly, a lot of whom are white. That's another thing, right? White people trying to be like, look how woke I am. Look how anti-racist I am. I can talk against people of the same complexion of me. It gets old after a while. It really does. But, my wife loved the Super Bowl halftime show. And I liked it. It was entertaining when they had all the different flags showing that America is not just one. It's not just the United States. It's a whole hemisphere. That was neat, and they included countries that we're supposed to hate, like Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela. That was pretty cool, right? And I mean, the elaborate set. I mean, it was a very elaborate set. I mean, my goodness, I haven't watched the Super Bowl halftime show in a couple of years, so maybe it's always that good. I thought it was great. I actually appreciated it. I wasn't offended by it, but I'm telling you, as much as I was not offended by it, I can understand that in this political context of there is a mantra from the woke people of white people bad, Christians bad, anyone who voted for Trump bad. Yeah, it's going to be taken badly. But here's the thing, and I tweeted this out. If I was Donald Trump, I would have paid them to do this, because this is the kind of argument Trump is good at having, right? Trump right now is wildly unpopular because of the Epstein files, because of threatening to bomb Iran, because of the country being in shit. He hasn't fixed inflation. The economy is not getting better. He keeps saying it is. Trump is doing an awful job right now. Let's be real. And his approval numbers are down like crazy. So Donald Trump tweeting out the video of the monkey, the racist video of Obama, brilliant. And now Trump having a big fight over the Super Bowl halftime show, brilliant. He can win those arguments, right? Whenever they call Trump racist, all the people that are like this, that are tired of white people bad, Christian bad, they all rally behind him every time. And this is the years of lead, folks. This is the years of lead. This is why I wrote the book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead. They want woke versus MAGA. The danger of an American Years of Lead. They want woke versus MAGA, right? They want red team versus blue team. They don't want a real economic agenda to rescue our country. They want a culture war. Don't give it to them. Don't let them get away with this. They want to foment the years of lead in America. Don't give it to them. Don't get mad about the Super Bowl halftime show. And honestly, don't rally in defense of it. Just move on. Let's talk about economic justice. Let's talk about ending the wars, right? I am so tired of woke versus MAGA, and woke versus MAGA isn't going to help us. And it's an engineered, staged fight from below to divide us, to get us all weary, Read my book about the years of lead. It's the years of lead in Italy. Don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. That is my advice. Don't get mad about the Super Bowl halftime show. Don't rally to the defense of the Super Bowl halftime show. Talk about economics. Talk about ending the wars. Talk about protecting our freedoms. Oppose the emerging low-wage police state. Oppose the danger of a new world war. We need a government of action that fights for working families. Don't fall into the trap. Don't fall into the trap of these culture wars. Just don't. That's my advice. That's my advice. And Megyn Kelly, we showed on here saying good things about Tulsi Gabbard. She had a horrible, unhinged video about the Super Bowl halftime show. Come on, folks. Come on, right? One thing I will say, and this is just a long time thing, right? And I've noticed this. This is what people that are in the majority, right? Zionists are like this. Evangelical Christians used to be like this, not so much anymore because the country's changed. But it's like, you're not persecuted if somebody who disagrees with you gets an opportunity to speak. Okay? When I was in college, right? The Atheist Humanist Association at my college started a club. Campus Crusade for Christ had existed for decades. The Catholic Newman Association had existed for decades. The Hillel organization existed in my college for decades. There were no Muslims at my college that I was aware of, at least not practicing. They didn't have a club at my college, but when I was in college, they started the Atheist Humanist Association. I went to some of their meetings because I was an atheist at the time. And every single one of the meetings, there would be an evangelical Christian who was angry that the group existed. And it's like, it was usually a woman, right? And she would be just emotional and upset that the group existed. And I would say to her, it was multiple different, do you not understand? You're allowed to have your club. We're allowed to have our club. Yeah, but your club is against God and against that. Yeah, but your club is against atheism, and you're a Protestant group. Aren't you against Catholicism? Well, no, but your group is being against God. This shouldn't be allowed. This is a Christian school, blah, blah, blah. And they just couldn't understand that, just like you're allowed to have Campus for Christ, just like the Catholics are allowed to have Newman, the atheists are allowed to have their own. No, they're not. They're bad. This is bad. And it was like they were just so used to everyone believing in God that people getting together, 5 or 6 people meeting for the Atheist Humanist Association, not believing in God was just this emotional, it shouldn't happen, that it's ridiculous, right? Zionists are like this. Every time a pro-Palestine person speaks, they feel like it's like some kind of anti-Semitic violence against them. Well, it's not, right? It's somebody disagreeing with you. Somebody disagreeing with you. If every time somebody who disagreed with me spoke, I threw a hissy fit, and it's just people that are used to being in the majority and used to having their majoritarian conformist views that everyone else around them thinks, they get easily triggered by suddenly somebody who disagrees with them is given a platform and able to speak. And it's a sign of intellectual weakness. And really, it's a sign that you're not very confident in your views. I probably sound like Charlie Kirk right now, but the people on Charlie Kirk's side used to do this, right? They used to be this way, and then things shifted. Now woke has the upper hand in colleges and things like that. So, but it's generally, as somebody who's been in the political minority almost my entire life, I was my family were the only Democrats in my little Republican town. I became a communist in college. Even now, whatever, I'm an anti-imperialist and all that. I'm used to seeing people who disagree with me speak. And it's just a fact of life. Grow up, allow it, right? It's not the end of the world. And, these people who are mad about the Super Bowl halftime show, okay, we'll change the channel, Turning Point USA had their Super Bowl halftime show with Kid Rock. Watch that. It's not the end of the world that somebody other than you got a platform. It's really not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. Right? I understand that they're putting in the context of they feel like everyone's screaming at them that they're bad because they're white, they're bad because they're Christian, they're bad because they voted for Trump. But that's not really what they were saying. Okay? That's not really what they were saying. So, don't be offended by the Super Bowl halftime show, but don't rally to the defense of it either. Don't buy into this woke versus MAGA stuff. That's my advice. All right? And it'll be tempting to cut this as a clip, and I kind of don't want to. I probably shouldn't, but who knows? All right. Well, listen, I need more people to send questions. I do need more people to send questions. Ask me some more questions. Best way to send questions is via Buy Me a Coffee. So if you can send questions, that would be great. I also do accept Rumble rants, and we've had a couple of them come in. So we'll start doing Rumble rants now, but please send more questions. Give me something to talk about. So, all right. Master Yoda said, okay. Yeah. Master Yoda is basically, and you are banned. So he's just shilling for some other group that is full of wreckers and, has defamed us. And, we're not interested. We're really not interested. So yeah, that's that. So yeah, and that's the sad thing, right? We're building a real organization here. We're not spewing hate for people on the internet. And then Hempcar said, what do you know about FDR banning gold? Well, yeah, he didn't ban. So my understanding is that FDR, right, he made the rule that the gold had to be, you couldn't hoard gold at your house because he wanted the US currency to be backed by gold. So you had to trade your gold for cash. Right. And that's Chiang Kai-shek did a similar thing when they adopted a paper currency in China. Right. The idea was you can't hoard cash in your home. Right. That's the idea. Right. You can't hoard cash in your home. That was the idea. And yeah. So yeah, that was the idea. It was just that because the US currency was backed in gold, they had to round up all the gold in the country. And yeah, that was the idea. That's my understanding. There is kind of an interesting, like the libertarian right wing has been kind of obsessed with gold. That is like a thing for a while, like going back to the 19, the silver standard versus the gold standard debate in the early 20th century with the McKinley administration. And that's what, Wizard of Oz was about, and the funny money theories, and that the silver standard, the populists wanted a silver standard instead of a gold standard. And that, a lot of the libertarian types want to go back to the gold standard because they think, well, our money needs to be backed by gold or something. And the John Birch Society. And that's a big, that kind of talk is like popular on the far right. What they call the far right is, like that. I can see Epstein has a photo of himself with Fidel Castro in his files. He said that he died. It opened. Okay. All right. I don't know what that means, Hempcar. And then Penny sent a video of a butterfly in space. So we'll put that on. This is from Chinese television of a butterfly in space. All right. We'll put that on. All right. So while we're downloading Penny's video of a butterfly in space from Chinese media, I will remind you all that questions can be sent in Rumble rants. You can send them to Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. But the best way to do it is to buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to send your questions. That's the best way to send your questions. So we're waiting for Penny's video about a butterfly in space. That'll be fun to watch. And it's a quick download. All right. So here we go. Here, I'll even change the name of it. Butterfly in space. All right, here we go. This is the video Penno sent in a Rumble rant about a butterfly in space. Right. So I guess they shot the butterfly into space to see how it interacted up there. I guess I was hoping it was from another planet or something, but I guess it was part of their research. That's good. I am a huge supporter of the space program. right? Liberals generally don't like the space program. I think the space program is really important. I think we need to expand the space program. So there you go. There you go. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, listen, I generally, while I'm waiting for people to send in questions, I generally put music on. So maybe we'll do that again tonight. We'll put some music on. I really do need people to send in more questions. I've got a few more minutes in me if you want. So, you know, ask some good questions. It is your responsibility to ask me some good questions. Buy me a coffee is the best way to send questions. So what music should I put on while I'm waiting for people to send questions? We should put on some music, right? So what music should I put on? Right? What music do we have? Well, this is The Sacred War, a World War II patriotic song from Russia. So we'll put on Sacred War. So send your questions.
Граждане и гражданки Советского Союза, сегодня в 4 часа утра без предъявления каких-либо претензий к Советскому Союзу, без объявления войны, германские войска напали на нашу страну, атаковали наши границы и подвергли бомбежке со своих самолетов наши города.
I love that video, I must say. I mean, that song is a great song, The Sacred War, the anti-Nazi song of the Soviet people defending their homeland. But yeah, that video is epic. I just can't show that video enough. I think there's another video that I really, really like. I think I have the North Korean national anthem on here, and that I find the version of it, I find, yeah, this is the North Korean national anthem. I also find this version of the North Korean national anthem to be amazingly epic. But send questions via Buy Me a Coffee. If not, the stream is going to end pretty soon. I need you all to send some more questions. So here we go. This is the North Korean national anthem performed in North Korea. absolutely love that song, I must say. North Korea has been through it all. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Reminder, questions can be sent as Rumble Rants, Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App, but Buy Me a Coffee is the best place. Buy Me a Coffee, Caleb Maupin. I did see, I think John just tweeted out. So I guess Thomas Massey and Ro Kahana did look at the unredacted version of the files of Jeffrey Epstein, and this is what they said.
Yeah, sorry to keep you guys out here that long. Well, that was an interesting experience. The user interface is a little clunky at first, but what I saw that bothered me were the names of at least 6 men that have been redacted that are likely incriminated by their inclusion in these files. So that's the first thing that I saw. It took some digging to find them. Then I'll let you talk about what you saw.
Well, and we discussed that. I mean, there are 6 men, some of them with their photographs that have been redacted, and there's no explanation why those people were redacted. And Thomas discovered it through his MIT logic with some of the searches.
Yeah, there you go. 6 people got covered up by the Department of Justice. There's 6 people that are in those files that, have somebody protecting them. So there you go. There you go. Yeah, that's pretty wild. So there's that. Okay, so now another question has come in from Huey Kingfish. And he says, hey, Caleb, what are your thoughts on World War II being a proxy war to slow the growth of the USSR and Churchill detesting FDR for being in the way? Yeah, well, it's clear that they didn't open a second front in World War II for a really long time. I was always taught that D-Day turned the tide of the war in Europe. That's not true. D-Day did not turn the tide of the war in Europe. Stalingrad did. And by the time D-Day happened, the Soviet Union was already winning the war. D-Day was to make sure the Soviet Union didn't liberate all of Europe, that they weren't, they didn't end up marching all the way to the beaches of France and liberating all of Europe from Hitler. The Allies had to make sure that some of Europe didn't get liberated by the Soviet Union. They liberated some of it. But yeah, the Soviet Union in Europe did almost all the fighting on its own until the last minute. But it was Stalingrad that was the turning point. The Soviet Union took Berlin. The Soviet Union gave 27 million people's lives, 27 million lives to defeat Hitler. And that gets covered up. And Winston Churchill and Roosevelt didn't get along. Roosevelt was a Bonapartist and had this alliance with the labor unions. Winston Churchill, let's talk about this, right? So Roosevelt and Winston Churchill were where they were in the position of power for very different reasons. Okay. Roosevelt was a New England old money Democrat, right? From a very, very wealthy family. He had a cousin who was a previous president, Theodore Roosevelt. But Roosevelt, he faced the threat of a military coup, the business plot against him. 1933, congressional testimony revealed that they were openly discussing overthrowing him with a military dictatorship. And when he saw that, and he saw the labor unrest, he basically realized he had to align with the labor movement in order to not be overthrown. There was a division in the ruling class, and he entered kind of a strategic alliance with the labor unions, with the Soviet Union to hold on to power. Churchill, on the other hand, was selected because a lot of the conservatives in Britain, in particular the monarchy, right, the British royal family, there were a lot of people that were Hitler admirers, right? King Edward had to step down because Wallis Simpson, his spouse, was known to be a Nazi sympathizer. It was supposedly you weren't allowed to marry divorcees, and he was the head of the Church of England, so he was forced to abdicate the throne, but, because they didn't believe in divorce. But it was really because they could have made an exception or changed the rules for him. They do that for kings all the time. But the King of England was forced to step down because he was known to be a Nazi sympathizer. His wife was a German intelligence and Nazi sympathizing person. And they basically arranged for him to be ousted. And Oswald Mosley, who had been in the parliament, had been in the Conservative Party, had joined the Labour Party, had split the Labour Party and formed the Union Party. The Union Party then changed its name to the British Union of Fascists, or the BUF. They had a lot of support, and there was a talk of a military coup to put the BUF, British Union of Fascists, into power, and to put King Edward back on the throne, and to dissolve the Parliament. And Oswald Mosley and his supporters were thinking about doing that. And so in Britain, in the lead up, there had been a huge socialist movement in Britain for years, the Labour Party and the Communist Party and all of that. In Britain, the danger to the establishment was coming from the right. And so in Britain, in the lead up to World War II, you had fanatical right-wing but anti-fascist movements that were created. It's actually very interesting. In America, communism had been pretty weak. Communism surged in America because Roosevelt, the president, was facing the threat of a fascist coup. He built a mass communist movement. In Britain, at the beginning of the 1930s, you had Ramsay MacDonald from the Labour Party, who was the leader, and didn't make things better and was awful. And that there was a lot of right-wing sentiments. The communists had kind of played all their cards. The communists were kind of seen as bankrupt in Britain, at that point, because there had been all these communist groups and there hadn't been a revolution and all of that. And so the left was kind of in decline in the lead up to World War II. And the right was gaining ground because the communists didn't look like they weren't going to take power. And they, the Social Democrats had run Britain in the early 1930s. Ramsay MacDonald had done an awful job, had not improved things. And so in Britain, the far right was gaining ground. And a lot of the people on the far right in Britain were fascists, including a king who had to step down, also including Oswald Mosley, etc. So in Britain, you had the rise of moral rearmament. And before moral rearmament was the Oxford Group. It was an American pastor, Frank Buckman, moved to Britain, and he started this group called the Oxford Group that mixed a lot of Christian ideas with a lot of Buddhist and Eastern concepts, and developed kind of a new synthesis, a new religion that was very conservative, very patriotic. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol. If you were a non-married man, to make sure you didn't masturbate or have sex before you were married, you had to live with a bunch of other non-married men. And they didn't drink alcohol, and they exercised together, and they were ultra patriotic, and they were the answer to Mosley, right? Oswald Mosley had been building the black shirts. They were a group of young men that were ultra patriotic and exercised together and beat up communists and wore black uniforms and loved Hitler. So the British government, there was the Oxford Group, which was this like little religious sect, and they blew up the Oxford Group into moral rearmament, it was called. Moral rearmament was an ultra patriotic group of young men that, didn't drink alcohol and were not sexual and were hyper patriotic and religious and conservative, but were against fascism, right? And moral rearmament was like the right-wing response to the British Union of Fascists. And Winston Churchill was a conservative. He was from the Conservative Party. So no one could accuse Winston Churchill of being a communist. Winston Churchill was a colonialist who had presided over all kinds of ugly colonialism. He was an awful racist. Winston Churchill there was no way anyone was going to think Winston Churchill was a communist. So he could come in and rally the country to go to war with Hitler and not be accused of being a communist, right? If the Labour Party had been in office, they would have accused the leader of being a communist. The military would have overthrown them. But it was like a maneuver, right? They were up against different things. The situation was different. So Winston Churchill was from the right, but he was the right that was against Hitler. Roosevelt was a mainstream Democrat who pivoted very far left to build a mass movement to protect himself. So they were in very, very different circumstances. Winston Churchill was an old colonial British imperialist, right? If there ever was one. I mean, after World War I, there's so many stories like this, so many of them. So many stories like this. But like, for example, after World War I, they outlawed the use of poison gas. Chemical warfare was outlawed by the Geneva Convention. And in Iraq, there was an uprising after World War I. The Iraqis rose up against the British, and the British put down the Iraqi revolt, and they used poison gas against the Iraqis, which was illegal. And they asked Winston Churchill, who was a member of parliament, about it. And he says, the Geneva Convention forbids using poison gas against men, not against Arab hordes, right? Not against Arab savages, right? And basically he said, it doesn't count because they're not white people. They're Arabs, right? There was a famine in India and millions of people starved to death. And he said, that's the fault of the Indian people. They breed like rabbits, He was a brutal mass murdering colonizer. And this is something that needs to be said, okay? One of the most annoying things about the body count stuff, right? Whenever you bring up communism, people say communism killed 100 gajillion billion people. And, World War II, Hitler, 6 million Jews, 8 million others, 14 million is the Holocaust, general estimate, right? And, but here's the thing. No one would have ever thought about being a communist or a fascist if it hadn't been for the fact that free trade had dominated the world from the 1700s onward. And free trade and free market globalism killed hundreds of millions of people, right? Hundreds of millions of people that we don't even know about these wars that free trade and free market capitalism killed. So if you want to say fascism killed this many, communism killed this many, no one would have ever thought of that if free trade hadn't killed hundreds of millions more. Right? The British waged 2 opium wars against China. And not only did hundreds of thousands of people die in those opium wars, but the result was China was unable to develop its own industries and remained a desperately poor, starving country in which people died every year of malnutrition. And it wasn't until the Communist Party came in that they stopped having people die all the time from famines. And that was because the British had dominated their economy. And the fields that should have been growing crops to feed people were growing opium to get people addicted to drugs so they could be used as slave laborers. And Shanghai was a capital of child prostitution. Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein circa 1900 would have been in Shanghai because the British had turned Shanghai into a giant center of child prostitution. And the reason they had so many people being sold into prostitution was because starvation was a reality. And Chinese parents whose children would have died from malnutrition would sell their daughters into child prostitution so they could eat, right? That was the reality, right? So people say, oh, well, Mao, there was this famine. Shut the fuck up, right? Before Mao, there were famines all the time that people died routinely. The level of poverty that existed before the communists came in is beyond anything you can imagine, right? And yeah, it's just infuriating to me when people give me this body count, right? And again, and it's just like, the British Empire waged how many wars in India? How many people did they work to death in India? I mean, you go all the African continent, they had machine guns. They would gun down entire villages on the African continent. Read about King Leopold in Belgium and how they extracted rubber from Belgium and they cut off people's hands if they didn't work hard enough. The USA, I never even learned in school about the Banana Wars. Did you ever hear about the Banana Wars? Right? The USA from 1900 all the way up until World War II, we had troops in every Central American and Caribbean country, in the Dominican Republic, in Nicaragua, in Guatemala, in Panama. We had wars in every single one of those countries, and wars that involved slaughtering entire villages and killing people. I know you've heard of the Spanish-American War, right? Well, have you heard about the Philippine-American War, the war that came afterwards? So the USA kicked Spain out of the Philippines, took it over for America, but the Filipinos wanted independence. And so for decades, the U.S. troops occupied the Philippines and slaughtered and killed hundreds of thousands of people, right? And no one ever talks about any of this, right? All we hear is communism and fascism killed all these people. The only reason people even thought about communism or fascism was because British colonialism, American colonialism, free trade killed so many people. The body count was so high that, let's talk about that, right? And you could just go down the line all over the Caribbean, all over Southeast Asia, all over India, all over Africa, all over the African continent. Free trade has killed more people than you can ever imagine. And, there you go. Right. I just had to get that out of my system because it's just like, it's like people, the libertarians, the standard libertarian narrative is capitalism is against violence. We're just against violence, non-aggression principle, right? And communists and fascists want violence. No, actually free trade is the most genocidal and murderous system that's ever existed. So there you go. There you go. All right. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are two of the handful of mainstream politicians not to be afraid to be interviewed by Jimmy Dore. I didn't know Ro Khanna had done Jimmy Dore. I saw Thomas Massie on Jimmy Dore. That was a good interview. I learned more about Thomas Massie. I like Thomas Massie in a lot of ways. And he talked very sensibly in that interview about why he can't run for president, things like that. I thought that was very interesting. That interview, it was very like honest and realistic. Thomas Massie is a libertarian Republican who is anti-Israel and anti-war, and I found that interview to be very honest and straightforward. I was kind of impressed by that interview he did with Jimmy Dore. I watch Jimmy Dore's stuff pretty regularly. I will say when it comes to the Erica Kirk stuff, I mean, I see the same stuff you all see. I just am choosing not to focus on that. I don't know. It's just not where I want to go. I don't think it's the best use of my time, but I'm seeing all the same stuff that you all have seen. And, Candace Owens, on the one hand, she's very heroic as a former Daily Wire person to be anti-Israel. And I really appreciate that. She does have some blocks in her head around a lot of things. And, I don't know. Some people have said they feel like maybe they're feeding her disinformation because sometimes Candace Owens goes a little bit all over the place and that doesn't help her cause. But at the same time, a lot of what I'm seeing, I see the same stuff and I find it very convincing about Erica Kirk and Charlie Kirk's death and all that. I see all the same stuff and I'm not opposed to Jimmy doing that. And I think Jimmy's doing a good service by talking about it. And so is Kim Iverson. I complimented Kim Iverson about it last time I was on her show. I said she's had great coverage of it. It's not where I'm choosing to go, but I don't oppose people going there. If people want to make that their issue, they're welcome to. I've decided I don't want to make that my focus on here, but I pay attention to it. It's really, really important. It's really, really important. And like I said before, dissident MAGA is the most important faction. I mean, if you know anyone who's in what you could call the dissident MAGA camp, please send them our statement. We need dissident MAGA to manifest itself, to make itself heard. Right. So send them the CPI, Center for Political Innovation statement. Dissident MAGA is where the hope in America is right now. The left is completely lost and the mainstream right is completely lost. They're having a big fight over the Super Bowl, so there we go. Right. So yeah, send that statement out. Right. Now, this is a provocative question somebody sent on the Rumble chat, but before I answer it, I will remind you all, if you've got any questions to ask me, Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send them. Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send it. Right. Rumble rants. There we go. Buy Me a Coffee. You can also do Rumble rants. You can also cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send questions. So send them soon because I got to finish laying out my book and stuff tonight. So, all right. But, so the question, it's a rather provocative question. Jesus Christ Superstar 420. So it's weed and an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. He says, knowing that Hamas has anti-communist roots and was propped up by Israel, do you still generally support a Palestinian state led by Hamas? Well, that's kind of a provocative question, I will say. And I can't give you a direct answer to that because that's not, at this point, Hamas isn't running Gaza, right? That's part of the deal. Hamas has lost control of Gaza. As far as Hamas is concerned, generally, I believe Palestinians do have the right to resist Israeli occupation. That said, Hamas has played a very negative role in the Syrian war. Hamas has played a very negative role in the Libyan conflict against Gaddafi. Hamas, I don't endorse their political views. I'm not a Sunni Muslim. I'm not I don't have their political perspective. I do believe Palestinians do have the right to resist Israel, but, and that ultimately the Palestinians would have the right to pick their own government. And what sparked all of this? Let's just talk about why did the Gaza war and all this happen? Because in Gaza, they had a democratic election where the Palestinians voted in a very democratic, transparent, internationally observed election, and they voted for Hamas. Hamas won the elections. Ever since then, Israel's been angry and bombing them and all the way up to October 7th, and at the end of the day, it would be up to the Palestinians what kind of government they wanted to have. That said, Hamas, there's a lot of things about Hamas I find objectionable. And there's a lot of people who feel that Hamas has mismanaged the Palestinian movement in many ways. And, you know, I find those arguments very convincing, but I'm not in Gaza. I'm not a Palestinian. Ultimately, it's up to the Palestinians what kind of government they want to have. But also the question is kind of irrelevant, because if you look at Trump's deal, it looks like Hamas is not going to be having any political power in Gaza. So, I mean, you know, Hamas is kind of over, it looks like. So I just, you know, I just don't even like, and that's the thing, that there's a lot of this kind of hypothetical grandstanding, right? It kind of reminds me of Noam Chomsky in a way. Noam Chomsky would always insist he was an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. I'm so much more radical. But what are you for in the real world? Noam Chomsky's would always, if they asked him, what do we do about it? He'd say, well, I don't advocate any political action. I'm just here to give information, you know? But then when the Democrats were, he would always say, vote for the Democrats, not the Republicans, the Democrats, not a third party, the Democrats. He would always do that. That was one thing Noam Chomsky would always do. Another thing that Noam Chomsky would always do is he would support the labor union bureaucracy and not challenge them. And he would denounce all the existing states. Noam Chomsky was a social democrat. But he did this, well, in a hypothetical world, I'm for direct workers' democracy, anarchism. That's not what the issue is, right? The difference between a communist, a social democrat, and an anarchist is how do you interact with state power, right? The social democrat believes that the state power can gradually be reformed into popular working class power. The communist believes it's a struggle to seize state power, not to gradually reform it, but to seize it. The communist wants the seizure of state power. The anarchist believes in creating socialism without state power, a socialism without coercion. That's not what Noam Chomsky believed. Noam Chomsky believed in voting for the Democrats, and gradually, you know, he was a social democrat, but he always, you know, did this, oh, I'm an anarchist. And that's kind of what this is, right? And, you know, you asked me, am I for a Palestinian state led by Hamas? That's not the situation we're in. So if I were to get on here and say, why, yes, I'm for that. Or if I was to get on here and say, no, I'm against that, what would that mean? That would be, you know, I mean, ideally, I'd be for, you know, I'd be for a socialist. I mean, I'd be for a complete anti-imperialist, fully developed, you know, high-tech. I mean, like, you know, you can play these games where it's like, well, what are you for? Right. And it's like, well, no, what are the options? What are the options that currently exist? Right. You know, do I believe the Palestinians have the right to resist Israeli occupation? Yes. And is Hamas the group that has been leading them in doing that? Yes. Is Hamas going to be running Gaza? No. Are they going to get an independent Palestinian state run by Hamas? No, it's not going to happen at this point. So, like, don't asking me if I'm for something hypothetically is just, I mean, it's a moot point, right? Like, you know, and that's the thing, like, even the whole does Israel have the right to exist thing. If you really want to press me, I don't believe in states that are for one race, right? I don't believe in a country for whites. I don't believe in a country for one race. I don't believe in that. Israel, by definition, is a state for one race, Jews, and it was artificially created by taking the land of the Arabs and ethnically cleansing the Arabs. So if you really want to press me, I'll say, no, Israel doesn't have the right to exist. But me saying that doesn't fucking matter, because Israel's going to keep existing. And ultimately, I want justice for the Palestinians. The only way the Palestinians are going to get justice is the Western imperialist world that created Israel and that is tied up with Israel has to not dominate the world. We have to move toward multipolarity. In the global South, opposition to Israel is pretty universal. On the African continent, unless you are certain kinds of evangelical Christians that support Israel, people are against Israel. Muslims, Christians, or otherwise, they're against Israel, unless they're a certain evangelical brand. You go to Asia, people tend to be against Israel. You go to South America, people, again, unless they're a certain type of evangelical Christian, they're against Israel, right? You know, so, you know, generally, if the countries of the so-called East or the so-called global South get stronger, if the West starts to balance and not completely dominate the world, if we get multipolarity, Israel will have to treat the Palestinians better, will have to get a two-state solution, and will have to transition to something different. So, you know, and that's a long-term answer. It's not a quick fix, and Palestinians are dying around the clock. And I'm sorry, I can't give you a quick fix solution, but me proclaiming a quick fix solution on my YouTube channel is not going to change the world, right? But yes, I don't agree with Israel existing as it does, right? But that doesn't matter. And that, you know, if I were to just pound my desk here and scream about the destruction of Israel, that wouldn't make things better at all, right? That at the end of the day, Israel does exist, and that somehow things do have to improve for the Palestinians, and that's going to take a geopolitical shift. And I understand people are saying we don't have time to wait. You know, people are dying around the clock. I hear you. But I'm just telling you that it looks like the way the Palestinians could gain liberation, and really the only way America can really reboot and working families in this country can have a future, is if we move toward the new economy, toward BRICS. That's the only future that America has. So there you go. All right. So I think that there aren't any more questions. So I think I'll probably end the stream here. So my episode with Academic Agent aired this morning. We got 2 more coming. I really want to make sure to get my book out because it's very related to one of the 2 remaining episodes with Academic Agent I did this morning. But join the Center for Political Innovation. We've got a lot of exciting activities planned. We're working on this outreach campaign aimed at dissident MAGA. And we got a lot going on. So join the Center for Political Innovation. I hope people found tonight's stream informative. Dare to struggle, dare to win, everybody. I'm going to put on the closing music, and we're going to call it a night. Thank you, everybody. If you have something you want me to talk about on the next stream, please send Buy Me a Coffee. I do need people to send more of those. Send another Buy Me a Coffee. If you got something for me to talk about on the next stream, you can send it anytime. It's open. It doesn't have to be while I'm streaming. Hopefully, I'll be back tomorrow night. Yeah. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.